Greetings, traveller of time. Let's journey to a small European village in the 13th century, just as the last traces of twilight melt into the deep blue of an autumn sky. From where do you listen? And what hour is it there? Let the weight of your own hours slip away, and come with me, slowly, into a moment of stillness. The air smells of damp earth and peat smoke, a scent that clings to the cold breeze and promises the faint comfort of stone hearths. Feel that chill against your skin, the moist wind descending from the marshes, and listen to the distant groan of wooden hinges as villagers shut their doors for the night. Before your eyes stretches the valley known as Shadowvale, a name softly ironic, for the valley is wide and open, embraced by low hills covered in gnarled oaks, whose branches seem to reach protectively over humble wattle and daub cottages. The scent of fermenting barley drifts from the small tavern at its centre, a pool of amber light in the growing dark, where deep voices mingle with the occasional clink of pewter mugs. Close your eyes for a moment, listen to the whisper of the wind, the cool breath of the evening, then open them to the glow flickering from a window of stretched animal hide, that primitive glass holding in the warmth. Now let's turn our gaze to a simpler dwelling at the edge of the village, where a young woman named Elara, 21 years old, finishes stacking the last bundles of firewood beside the wall, feeling the rough, cold bark beneath her calloused fingers. The daughter of peasants, married just over a year to Mattis, the linen weaver, she lives a life of endless tasks that leave little room for thought, yet they've shaped her into a woman of quiet strength and keen observation. Her brown eyes often seem to search beyond the horizon of her small world. The scent of smoke and slow-cooked bone broth is the only perfume she knows, a fragrance of endurance and belonging to the earth that sustains her. Her marriage to Mattis was arranged by their families, as most were among the serfs of the manor. Though it lacked the fire of troubadour songs, it carried the quiet dignity and mutual respect that bound many unions of that time. Historically, most peasant marriages, while overseen by parents or the local lord, weren't formally consecrated in church until much later in the Middle Ages. A simple handshake and cohabitation before witnesses were often enough to seal the bond. Ilara's dowry consisted of a modest linen trousseau woven by Matisse and a few farm animals. She moves through their single-room home with silent grace, lighting a small oil lamp whose dim glow sends dancing shadows across the clay walls. The thick scent of burning oil mingles with smoke, a blend that feels like home and survival. Matisse bends over his loom, the great wooden frame dominating half the space, and the rhythmic sound of the shuttle sliding through the threads is the heartbeat of the house, a steady, reassuring pulse that means bread, work, and continuity. The chill seeps through the wool of Ilara's dress, reminding her of the ceaseless battle against the elements. Her thoughts drift to the older women of the village, faces lined with years of harvests and hard winters, guardians of untold stories about childbirth and loss, keepers of ancient wisdom whispered only by the fire. They are the living memory of Shadowvale, and Ilara watches them with reverence and a touch of fear, sensing that her own fate is written in their hands, a destiny shared by all daughters of the soil. A peasant woman's life in the 13th century was a web of physical labor and household duty, and Ilara felt its weight on her narrow shoulders from dawn until dusk. Rest came only in the deep, dreamless sleep that readied her for repetition. Tending the garden, grinding grain, spinning flax and wool, cooking meager meals, and bearing children were the pillars of her world. She performed each task with quiet devotion, aware that her family's survival depended on her perseverance, a strength not of muscle, but of spirit. She recalls a conversation with her mother before the wedding, about the mysteries of a woman's body, those whispered taboos surrounding birth, death, and the fragile thread between them. That lingering unease still lives within her, surfacing whenever a church bell tolls for a baptism or a funeral. In the Middle Ages, the line between the two was heartbreakingly thin, especially for mothers and newborns. That awareness of mortality weighed heavily, yet it also made her cherish every fleeting moment of warmth and safety. While Mattis continues weaving, his movements firm and measured, Ilara prepares a chamomile infusion gathered from the hillside, an earthy tea meant to calm the nerves and invite sleep. Its sweet, herbal scent fills the room, softening the harsher smells of smoke and fat. The tea's faint bitterness is familiar and comforting, part of a nightly ritual shared between husband and wife, a quiet passage from work to rest, sealing their companionship built on necessity and discreet affection. In that lull, Ilara's mind turns to Agnes, the village midwife and healer, a figure both feared and revered. Living on the forest's edge, Agnes possessed a knowledge of herbs and childbirth that far surpassed that of the wandering physicians who rarely stopped in Shadowvale. Her home was shrouded in mystery, and Ilara often felt a growing curiosity about this woman who seemed to live by her own rules, walking alone, speaking little, yet wielding hands that could summon life or soothe pain. Ilara sits near the hearth, the warmth against her tired legs a welcome relief. Her gaze lingers on Mattis, absorbed in his craft, his skilled hands turning raw thread into soft cloth, a small miracle of patience she quietly admires. The rhythmic thud of the shuttle is now the only sound, filling the silence with a meditative cadence. She allows her eyes to close for a moment, stealing a fragment of rest, a brief folding of time where dreams slip gently in. Mattis pauses, meeting her eyes with a shy tenderness. He's a man of few words but steady gestures, and when his large hands cover hers, it's his way of saying we're in this together. He speaks softly about the wool to be carded tomorrow, about the market in the nearby town, small details that form the larger fabric of survival. Ilara listens closely, because his worries are hers too. In that simple exchange lies the quiet strength of their marriage. She resumes spinning, her spindle turning in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. The soft whir of thread winding joins the sound of the loom, a humble symphony that fills the night, making the darkness feel less vast. The lamp casts their shadows tall across the walls, transforming their routine into a dance of silhouettes, a reminder that they are not alone, but bound together by work, warmth, and the fire that keeps their world alive. Ilara's thoughts drift to the dyes used in cloth, the peasants' only way to bring color into their lives. She and Mattis could afford only simple hues, browns and pale yellows made from bark and roots nearby. The rich blues and scarlets of nobility were far beyond their reach, requiring rare insects and fermented pigments, a luxury that might as well belong to another world. The coarse texture of wool between her fingers reminds her of their clothing, never soft, but durable and warm, built to withstand both labor and weather. In that endurance lay its beauty. Nothing in a peasant's life was disposable. Every garment was mended, reused, reborn, until it simply couldn't endure anymore. Outside, the village sinks into darkness, wrapped in the hush of night. Only the faint murmur of insects and the creak of timber break the stillness, a chorus belonging to the earth itself. Ilara closes the wooden shutter, sealing out the cold. The heavier air inside carries the mixed scent of smoke and bodies, a reminder of winter's closeness and the inescapable intimacy of shared survival. She watches Mattis extinguish the lamp. Darkness deepens, sharpening the other senses. The crackle of the dying fire becomes the focus, a lingering promise of warmth until dawn. The smoke thickens, as though the house itself exhales the last breath of the day. The couple prepares to rest, Ilara's mind still turning with the day's images, even as her body yields to sleep. In that silence, darkness feels less like a threat and more like comfort, a veil hiding fatigue and worry, allowing small dreams to bloom of a fuller garden, a gentler winter. Ilara lies down on straw and sheepskin, feeling the rough texture beneath the heavy linen sheet and the steady warmth of Mathis beside her, a human shield against the cold and the solitude of existence. Faint memories from childhood drift in. Fairy tales whispered by her grandmother, stories of brave women defying dragons and finding peace through courage. She wonders if bravery also lives in the quiet, unseen acts of each day, in endurance, in the refusal to give up when life allows so little choice. Perhaps she thinks the truest adventure is survival itself, the silent heroism of hearts that keep beating against the odds. Midnight settles quietly, and the air inside the cabin grows thick and warm, a stark contrast to the biting cold gathering outside. Ilara is deep in sleep, the only true escape from the endless cycle of labor. The silence is so complete that, in her dreams, she can almost hear the sound of falling snow, though autumn still lingers, a faint premonition of the harsh winter drawing near. It's a season that demands every grain be stored, every stick of wood preserved. That struggle against nature forms the backdrop of her life, and even in rest, the thought of survival never fully leaves her. The only movement in the dark is the slow, steady rhythm of two breaths in unison. The faint sweetness of chamomile blends with the earthy scent of straw and the smoky tang embedded in their clothes, a fragrance of simplicity and unvarnished life. The straw beneath them isn't just for comfort. It keeps the dampness of the earthen floor at bay, an essential precaution in an age when understanding of illness was primitive and infant mortality heartbreakingly common. Such small acts of prevention were the only real defense they had. In the delicate realm of dreams, Ilara relives the day, not as a burden, but as a flowing river of completed tasks. The warmth of the fire in her legs mingles with the remembered weight of the wood bundles on her back, that eternal balance between effort and reward that defines the peasant's life. She dreams of Agnes's house, wrapped in silver mist, of the healer's secret knowledge, a key to the mysteries of pain and the body, a quiet kind of power born not from strength, but from nature's silent wisdom. Mathis stirs beside her, just enough to remind her of his presence, a steady, unquestioned warmth, the physical manifestation of shared duty and fate. In the Middle Ages, individuality was eclipsed by family and community, and together they were a single economic force, two halves of one laboring whole. Even their intimacy at night was but an extension of that interdependence. A thought of the city breaks into her dreams, a place of jarring contrasts, of wealth and filth, spices and stench. A world of stone and trade, so unlike her own world of soil and harvests. She envisions the market with its chaotic hum of voices, the glitter of silk and metal, a sight both alluring and frightening. It's a glimpse of a life beyond reach, one that makes her question the narrow boundaries of her small valley. She remembers a story told by a traveller about the merchant wives of the towns, women who held certain freedoms, who managed household money, who even in some guilds ran businesses of their own. That knowledge, that faint historical truth about urban women's relative autonomy, stirs a quiet envy in Ilara, a longing for a world where her strength could yield more than mere survival. Her sleep is interrupted by a familiar sound, the distant croak of frogs in the marsh. It repeats in steady intervals as she turns over, the coarse linen brushing her cheek and bringing her gently back to the dim reality of the cabin. The scent of unwashed linen reminds her of the tasks waiting at dawn, the eternal wheel of labor turning not by church bells, but by the relentless rhythm of light and dark. Her thoughts drift to her friend Lyra, married to a blacksmith in a neighboring village, a marriage that turned cruel and loveless. She thinks of the silence that surrounds women who suffer abuse, for in medieval law, a husband held near absolute power, and intervention was rare, often futile. It's one of the darker truths unrecorded by history, carried quietly by those who had no voice. Ilara reaches out in the dark and feels the linen Mathis wove, cloth he calls fine, though she knows they'll need much more of it to ensure a safe winter. In that touch, she finds purpose, a small act of defiance against a feudal system that claims their labor and land. The linen is the one thing truly theirs, the only product they can trade for something lasting. At the height of the night, when the stars burn brightest and the cold bites hardest, Ilara allows herself a rare, pure thought. A vision of the vast, dark sky stretching endlessly above her small world. The thought humbles and frees her at once. She's just a small flicker in time, but her struggle mirrors that of countless women before her, and her hope plants the seed of a gentler future, even if she'll never live to see it. The wind moans through the chimney, a mournful song. She feels the drop in temperature, a sign of frost to come. Ilara nestles closer to Mattis, seeking warmth, and the touch of his skin against hers reminds her that even in a harsh age, strength lives in these quiet unions, in the fragile threads of human connection woven against the indifference of the world. Life, she thinks, half dreaming, is nothing more than a chain of small moments of warmth and silence. Sleep deepens, rich and restorative, the only luxury the land allows. The sweet scent of valerian lingers in the air, a promise for the next night, a small secret link between her and Agnes. The cabin's darkness shields them from the world, and the last thing visible is the faint red glow of the dying embers, pulsing like a heart, a beacon of warmth in the sea of cold. Ilara remembers her mother's words. Winter is when women gather, spinning wool together around the fire, sharing stories and secrets, the only safe space where pain can be spoken without judgment. She longs for that circle, that quiet companionship woven from trust and thread alike. The warmth of Mattis's body anchors her to the present, and she surrenders fully to sleep, knowing that in a few hours the day will begin again, relentless and demanding. But for now, beneath a sky she cannot see, she is safe, wrapped in a universe of darkness and warmth. Security feels complete, and the sound of Mattis's breathing is the last thing she hears. Time drifts like fog through the medieval night. Minutes stretch into hours of rest. Ilara dreams of linen fields in bloom, blue and endless, a vision of abundance and beauty that contrasts with her hard reality. The scent of wet soil and the cool touch of dew in her dream feel more real than the darkness of the cabin. This moment of rest is an act of quiet rebellion, a declaration of the human need for stillness in the face of endless toil. The sleeping village bears witness to that shared struggle, each soul fighting its own battle against exhaustion and cold. Ilara isn't a heroine, only a survivor, and her strength lies in her ability to dream of a kinder world. The wind outside rises, whistling through the cracks, a signal that dawn is near, that the cycle will soon begin again. But for now, she's at peace, wrapped in warmth and safety, floating in her small universe, a fragile bubble of serenity against the vastness of the Middle Ages. Her breathing deepens, and her final thought drifts softly. Gratitude for the small bundle of valerian, a seed of hope and quiet autonomy tucked close to her heart. Midnight settles in, and the air inside the cabin turns thick and warm, a sharp contrast to the cutting cold pooling outside. Ilara is sunk deep in sleep, a small island of oblivion, the only true escape from endless work. The silence is so complete that, in her dreams, she can almost hear snow falling, though it's still autumn, an omen of the hard winter coming on, a season that demands every grain be stored and every stick of wood set aside. That struggle with nature is the backdrop of her life, and even in rest, the worry of survival never quite lets go. The only movement in the dark is the soft, synchronized breath of two bodies. The gentle sweetness of chamomile mingles with the earthy scent of straw and the faint, stale smoke clinging to their clothes, a fragrance of bare, simple living. The straw beneath them isn't just for comfort. It keeps the damp of the packed earth floor from seeping up, an essential bit of hygiene and health in an age when knowledge of disease was rudimentary and infant mortality heartbreakingly high. Preventive care, however small, was the only real shield they had. In the delicate space of dreams, Ilara revisits the day, not as a burden, but as a river of completed tasks. The memory of fire warmth in her legs blends with the remembered weight of wood bundles across her back, a constant pairing of effort and reward that defines the peasant's life. She dreams of Agnès the healer's house, veiled in silver mist, and of the secret knowledge the woman holds, a key to the mysteries of pain and the body, a promise of power not born of muscle, but of nature's quiet wisdom. Mattis shifts in his sleep, just enough to rekindle her awareness of his presence, that steady, unquestioned heat beside her. In the Middle Ages, the self gave way to family and village, and Ilara and Mattis were first and foremost an economic pair, two halves of a single force of labor. Even the intimacy of night was an extension of that interdependence. A thought of the city breaks the stillness of her dreams, the place where Mattis will go to sell cloth. It's a world of fierce contrasts, of wealth and want, of foul smells and exotic spices, of stone streets and merchants, a counterpoint to her soil and harvest life. She sees the market in her mind, the chaotic hum of voices, the gleam of silks and metal, a sight both thrilling and frightening. It's a fleeting glimpse of a life out of reach, one that makes her question the narrow borders of her valley. She recalls a traveller's tale about townswomen, wives of merchants and craftsmen, who held certain freedoms, kept charge of household money, and sometimes, within certain guilds, ran their own businesses. That small historical truth, urban women's relative autonomy compared with the near-total submission expected of peasant women, sends a faint shiver of envy through Ilara, a longing for a world where her strength might yield more than bare subsistence. Her sleep breaks at a familiar sound, the distant croak of marsh frogs repeating at even intervals. She turns on the bed, and the coarse linen brushing her cheek brings her gently back to the cabin's dark. The scent of unwashed flax linen is a quiet reminder of dawn's waiting work, the never-ending wheel of tasks that turns not by church bells, but by the implacable swing of light and dark. She thinks of her friend Lyra, married to the blacksmith in a neighboring village, a union that proved cruel and unhappy. She thinks of the silence around abused women, for medieval law gave husbands near absolute power, and community intervention was rare and often useless. It's a dark truth official histories seldom record, shouldered quietly by many women. Ilara reaches into the dark and touches the linen Mathias wove. Cloth he calls fine, though she knows they'll need much more to see them safely through the winter. In that act of touching their work, she finds purpose, a small resistance to the feudal order that makes them servants of the land. Linen is the one thing truly theirs, the thing they can trade for something sturdier. At the height of night, when the stars burn brightest and the cold bites hardest, Ilara lets herself think freely for a breath, a vision of the vast dark above and the smallness of her village under it. The thought humbles her and sets her free at once. She's only a small point in time, but her struggle is the echo of all the women who came before her, and her hope is a seed for a gentler future, even if she never lives to see it. The wind starts to whistle through the chimney, a melancholy song. She feels the temperature shift, a sign the weather's turning, the damp breeze now edged with frost. Ilara burrows closer to Mattis, reaching for immediate warmth, and the touch of his skin against hers reminds her that, for all the age's harshness, strength lives in small unions, in the human bonds strung tight against the world's indifference. Life, she thinks, half asleep, is a chain of simple moments of warmth and quiet. Morning's air hasn't fully stirred over Shadow Vale, but Ilara's body already senses the first thread of light slipping through the crack in the wooden door, a silver line in stubborn dark. She wakes before the rooster, a habit carved by the need to cook, to stoke the day, and to get the spinning started before the sun climbs high. The cold rising from the earthen floor is her first greeting, sharp enough to steel her for the chill of dawn. The first element in our slow morning is water, precious and perilous in the Middle Ages. Ilara rises with a soft groan and takes the wooden bucket by the door, feeling the weight of the walk to the village spring, where the running water is cleanest. She makes that trip dozens of times a day. It sets the rhythm of her mornings. A thick fog drapes the valley, turning cabins into floating islands and muffling the sound of the stream, like a dream not quite finished. Near the spring she finds Agnès the healer, filling a clay jar with steady focus. Their meeting, under the fog's veil, carries a quiet respect and a small spark of curiosity. Agnès lives by her own rules, and her wisdom is rooted in a deep, practical knowledge of herbs and the body, something the church sometimes eyed with suspicion, but which the community accepted out of pure need. Agnès is in her early 40s, time-worn yet keen-eyed, with a vitality that sets her apart. Her hands, calloused by roots and leaves, move with a careful, almost liturgical grace. She doesn't dress like other married women. Her tunic is darker linen, oak bark dyed. Her hair, which most respectable women would cover, is bound in a thick braid, and she smells not of smoke, but of dried thyme and sage, wild and medicinal. Compelled to speak, Ilara asks, voice rough with cold, about an elderly neighbor's health. Agnès answers in short, precise phrases, showing a striking grasp of the body's humors and the weather's toll on health. What Ilara doesn't know is that, in the 13th century, many midwives and healers held the most practical knowledge of anatomy and pharmacology passed down orally from mother to daughter, while formal study remained the domain of men and monasteries. It's a historical truth that explains the quiet importance and power of women like Agnès in village life. Ilara watches Agnès's hands, nails cut short, skin stained by earth and plant juices, hands that refuse to accept illness and death as foregone conclusions. The healer speaks of hot infusions to drive out the damp that creeps into bones, simple advice that rings true to Ilara's experience. The spring's murmuring water is their only accompaniment, a steady voice of life itself. Agnès turns and studies Ilara with a calm intensity. Her eyes, an uncommon grey-blue, seem to read the unease behind the younger woman's tired face. She asks nothing, but offers a small bundle wrapped in oak leaf. "Valerian root," she says, voice low and reassuring. "For nightmares, and for a weariness that won't dissolve. Burn it before bed." The parcel is surprisingly light and cool, a gesture of trust and care that disarms Ilara. She thanks her, throat tight. The strong, loamy scent of valerian mingles with sage, and Ilara understands Agnès's magic isn't spellwork, but a deep bond with the earth and its healing properties. A knowledge that lets her wield a quiet kind of power and offer comfort in a world full of uncertainty. As Ilara fills her bucket, feeling the weight rise with the cold water, she watches Agnès fade into the fog toward her solitary hut. The mystery around her grows, not as something frightening, but as a suggestion, a hint that another path exists. Perhaps there is a way for a woman to be a keeper of knowledge and a giver of relief, not only a servant of house and field. That image of autonomy plants itself in Ilara's mind like a seed. She heads home, the slosh of water setting a steady rhythm that soothes her. The valerian scent in her pocket, a promise of calmer sleep and a lighter heart. Inside, Mathis is already awake. The sound of the poker teasing the embers fills the air. The sight of the fire coming back to life is a sign of continuity, of the day's eternal restart, of the comfort routine can bring. Mathis doesn't ask where she's been. Mornings have their own rules and silences. He turns to his first task, setting the loom for another day, each careful motion the mark of a craftsman who knows his trade to the bone. Ilara returns to her chores, kindling the fire beneath the iron pot where barley porridge will cook. The scent rises, simple food and steady energy for the hours ahead. The heat of the hearth now presses warmly against the cold morning, a welcome contrast. Ilara thinks of medieval houses built to hold heat with few openings and thick wattle and daub walls. Smoke and heavy smells came with the design, but such choices were essential to surviving hard winters, an architecture of necessity, the bedrock of their comfort and safety. The soft tapping of Mathis's hammer on the loom's beams reminds her of the heavy work waiting for him, and she feels a deep respect for his quiet devotion. The day unfolds at a slow, predictable pace. Fear and curiosity dissolve into the immediate need to work, to keep food on the table, to guard the small flame of life. The day will be long, and night's silence the only real relief. They eat the porridge quickly, simple, yes, but vital, breaking the night's fast. Ilara feels warmth slide down her throat, fueling a body that must hold steady for spinning, her main task after the housework. The flax that Mathis brought from the last market sits stacked in a corner, waiting to be turned into thread. The fibers are rough and a bit oily from retting and drying. Their dry, faintly pungent smell fills the room, the scent, really, of her future livelihood. She takes up the spindle and her stool, settling in for a long meditative session, work that asks little of the feet, much of the hands, and even more of patience. Spinning is women's work, done in nearly every spare hour. Though repetitive and finger-wearing, it frees the mind to wander, and in those quiet, labouring moments, Ilara makes sense of the world around her. The spindle's rhythmic whir becomes the room's leading sound, a softer, more feminine counterpart to the loom's crisp clatter. Together, the two rustic rhythms make the music of their partnership in work and life. She recalls a curious truth about dowries. For peasant women, the real wealth often wasn't coin, but spun linen, sheets and garments, the clearest sign of how indispensable women's spinning was to a family's economy. As she spins, Ilara glances through the small window slit. The village is slowly waking. She sees her neighbor Clémence coaxing a fire to life. A thread of smoke rises, proof that the cycle has begun for everyone. The mingled scent of many hearths becomes the smell of community, of shared labor and quiet watchfulness, where public and private barely part ways, and one person's fate is bound up in everyone else's. With her fingers moving in steady motion, she thinks again of Agnès, of the valerian root now tucked in a clay jar, and of how the healer relies on no man and few prayers, only on knowledge and hard-won wisdom. That independence, even at the margins, draws Ilara like a lodestone, a vision of quiet power, a counterweight to the submission expected of peasant women, whose bodies and labor belong by law to their husbands and ultimately to the Lord. That small rebellion of thought is her subtle way of questioning the old rules. The soft clucking of hens near the door and the rumble of an ox cart along the dirt road tell her morning is moving on and the village is fully awake. The cold air still threading through the cracks reminds her the workday will be long and the temperature will climb only slowly. Yet Ilara feels lighter than usual. That brief talk with Agnes and the small medicinal gift have slipped a new layer of purpose into her routine, a promise that perhaps the world isn't made only of hard work and silence. She winds the fresh thread on the spindle. The soft feel of growing yarn between her fingers is proof, tangible and immediate, of what her effort can make. The nearly full spindle satisfies her in a quiet way. She smiles to herself, not with joy exactly, but with resolve, and turns her mind to what comes next, starting the midday meal and fetching more wood before afternoon wanes. The day is long, and her strength is the single thing that truly belongs to her. The sun begins to rise above the gnarled oaks, and the fog hanging over Shadowvale thins, revealing the stark landscape, and the work waiting in the damp gardens and the rye fields. Ilara sets the spindle aside for a moment, feeling the dull numbness in her fingertips, the quiet cost of hours spent spinning, and gets ready to step outside to tend the few animals they own, a milk goat and a small flock of hens. Their lives are precious. They're an irreplaceable source of protein in a diet built mostly on grains and vegetables. She pulls on a heavier wool coat, feeling the weight of it hold back the lingering cold. Stepping out of the cabin, the clamour of the hens swells, a chorus demanding feed, and the smell of the byre, a mix of hay, manure and damp, rises to meet her. It's familiar, not unpleasant, simply the unmistakable scent of subsistence. The sight of the goat, patiently chewing a tuft of hay, brings a brief, steadying peace. She recalls an old historical truth. Many medieval women, especially in the countryside, knew a kind of rustic veterinary craft, tending animals with herbal infusions and simple rituals. That knowledge was as vital as human healing because the animal's health underwrote the family's survival. Milking requires patience and a firm, gentle touch. Ilara feels the warm milk stream into the wooden pail, a white, vital liquid that will go into porridge and one day into children's bowls, though she and Mattis have none yet. This milk is more than food. It's savings, a form of wealth renewed each morning, and every drop counts. The soft, steady rhythm of milk hitting the pail becomes its own music, a quiet hymn to the slow, unhurried progress of the day and to nature's simple productivity. From the little pen, she hears the distinctive, repeating thud of an axe in the surrounding forest, the signature sound of humanity's constant wrestle with the wild. She knows it's Mattis, working with other men to secure firewood for the coming days, hard, dangerous labor, but essential with winter closing in. The bite of cold in her lungs reminds her how fortunate they are to have access to the woods, a resource that ultimately belongs to the Lord, yet remains vital to the village's survival. Back in the cabin, she finds Mattis's loom silent and empty, a small reminder of her brief, solitary morning, and she returns to spinning with renewed focus. Her thoughts drift forward, toward the uncertainty hanging over every married woman, the possibility of conceiving. She knows the truth. Childbirth could be deadly, and women's life expectancy was often shorter than men's because of pregnancy and delivery. It's a sorrow hidden beneath the social expectation to bear children. The spinning becomes meditative. The steady motion of her hands gives her mind a place to go. She concentrates on the dry scent of flax and the feel of fibers changing under her fingers, taking comfort in the predictability of the work. The spindle's soft whir soothes her, and she lets her thoughts wander to the lives of saints and to the women of myth she's heard about, figures who found strength through terrible trials. In those old stories, she looks for a pattern of endurance and dignity. She thinks of a detail about dress. A peasant woman wore her undergarment, a simple linen shift, almost continually, and washing was rare and arduous, done only a few times a year. The faint mingling of sweat, smoke and wool was simply part of daily life, accepted as natural. The lack of strict hygiene, as we'd understand it today, wasn't something Elara dislikes. It's something she meets with quiet resignation. Now the sun spills through the window slit, a golden beam cutting the cabin's dimness. Dust motes turn in the light like tiny stars, and she basks for a moment in that natural warmth, feeling a small renewal that nudges her forward. The earlier silence, once a loneliness, becomes refuge, a pocket of space where her most private thoughts can unfold without interruption or judgment. She recalls a little human story she once heard about a cooper's wife in a nearby town, a woman named Isolde, who fled an abusive husband and found sanctuary in a Benedictine convent, where she devoted herself to painting manuscripts, a respected art. The possibility that a woman might find safety and a livelihood in religious refuge, even at the price of seclusion, strikes her as powerful, a radical alternative to the narrow path of rural life. In her mind, Isolde's image blends with Agnès's fierce self-sufficiency, forming a quiet mystery. Women's lives aren't a single road, but a cluster of constrained choices. And true strength lies in finding one's own refuge and knowledge within the age's tight boundaries. The spindle's turning and its soft, steady murmur become a mantra, helping her hold to this idea of silent resistance. She realizes the darkest truth about medieval women's lives isn't only the hard labor or fragile health. It's the muting of their voices, the invisibility of their suffering and their gifts. That's why figures like Agnès and Isolde matter so much. They're beacons of resistance, reminders that knowledge and self-determination are the last forms of power left to them. The spinning becomes meditative again. The steady motion of her hands gives her mind a place to go. She concentrates on the dry scent of flax and the feel of fiber changing under her fingers, finding comfort in the work's predictability. The spindle's soft whir calms her, and she lets her thoughts drift to saints and the women of myth, those who survived terrible trials, searching their stories for a model of endurance and grace. She turns over another detail about dress, the peasant woman's linen shift worn almost constantly, washing rare and grueling, and that subtle blend of sweat, smoke, and wool, a constant companion, simply life as it is. Elara meets it without disgust, only with a clear-eyed acceptance. Sunlight now pours through the window, a golden blade cuts the cabin's dim and lights floating dust. The warmth feels like renewal, gently urging her on. What was once loneliness becomes shelter, a space where her inward thoughts can open, untroubled by the village's eyes. She remembers a story about the cooper's wife, Isolde, who escaped her husband's violence and found a haven with Benedictine nuns, painting sacred pages to earn her keep and respect. That a woman might find freedom and livelihood in religious life, even one walled by silence, feels like a revelation, a bold alternative to the single track of field and hearth. Isolde's image and Agnès's autonomy knit together in Elara's mind, weaving a soft, persistent truth. Women's lives branch within limits, and strength is found in discovering one's own shelter and learning within those bounds. The spindle's hum keeps time with the thought, a quiet litany of patient defiance. She understands now that the real, shadowed truth of women's lives isn't only toil or frailty. It's the silencing of their stories and the masking of their talents. That's why women like Agnès and Isolde shine so bright. They stand as wayfinders, proving that knowledge and self-rule are the last best powers still at hand. Weary at last, Elara ends the session. The spindle is heavy with linen. The neat stack of finished thread is a silent victory, proof of diligence and strength. She rubs her hands, feeling the roughness that work has etched into her skin, the raw linen smell rising close and strong. From a distance, the chop of Mathis's axe draws nearer. He's on his way home, and the hour of solitude and reflection ebbs. Mathis's return brings a fresh current into the room. the scent of sweat and clean, sappy wood, the sound of his firm steps on the packed earth. Safety settles with him. The day's cycle turns again. Spinning gives way to kindling the fire for the midday meal. Their exchanged glance is wordless, yet full of the mutual understanding of work done well. And so, as the cooking fire's warmth spreads and the smell of simple vegetable broth and rye bread fills the air, Ilara and Mattis share a brief rest before they shoulder their tasks again. Mystery and curiosity soften into the quiet of the everyday, a reminder that even in the Middle Ages, life held small pauses where a hot meal and a familiar presence were the greatest treasures. The world outside may be harsh, but within these wattle and daub walls, there is peace. Afternoon deepens over Shadow Vale, carrying a softer amber glow that warms the wattle and daub walls to shades of sun-baked clay. After a frugal but heartening midday meal, Ilara and Mattis return to their tasks, the food's energy renewing their resolve for the hours still ahead. The hearth smoke, briefly faded, curls back with the rekindled flame, a steady, homely scent of continuity. The room's lingering heat is a subtle comfort against the quickly cooling air. Productivity settles in, quiet and sure, so that every sound, the breath, the ember's soft crackle, the spindle's low hum, folds into the same work song. At this deepening hour, we linger on Ilara's bond with the knowledge embodied by Agnes, the healer, on the small bundle of valerian she keeps. The clay jar that holds the root is cool and damp to the touch. Inside lies a small, misshapen piece of dried brown root, common to the eye, yet holding a mysterious force, a direct thread back to the forest's healing properties that underpinned most folk medicine of the time. Ilara touches the jar with a kind of reverence. The gift is more than an herb, it's a sign of women's autonomy. This green medicine, passed from woman to woman by word of mouth, essential know-how kept at the margins of university learning, which relied on ancient texts and humoral theory and remained open only to educated men. Often the most effective remedies in a peasant village came from the healer's hands, rooted in local plants and careful observation, not from the rare surgeon or apothecary passing along the road. The valerian's earthy, faintly bitter scent is the very fragrance of this ancestral, half-forbidden knowledge. Ilara returns to her spinning, mind lighter now, floating on the idea that a woman's body, seen by society mostly as a vessel for childbirth and an instrument of labor, could also be an object of study and self-command. Strength might reside secretly in understanding her own rhythms and ailments. The spindle's repetitive hypnotic whir becomes an encouraging whisper, inviting her to test the boundaries set around her life. She uses the steady motion as meditation, sharpening her curiosity. Her gaze settles on Mattis, busy with a new lot of flax, dressing the warp on the loom, a task that demands precision and strong arms. She admires his diligence, yet feels the difference between their worlds. His work is solid and graspable. Agnes's realm is invisible and fluid, guided by lunar cycles and the medicinal magic of plants. The contrast between the loom's certainty and the healer's airy lore returns again and again in Ilara's thoughts. Mattis, the weaver, is a practical man. His world ends at what can be woven, counted, or traded for bread. He accepts the rules of the feudal order with quiet resignation and stakes their stability on durable linen. The raw flax's rough bite in his palms is his reality. The shuttle's dry knock is his assurance. He leaves the unseen forces, life and death, mystery and meaning, to monks and to women. Ilara bends over the spindle and winds more thread, the ceaseless motion drawing her into a calm, contemplative state. She remembers how her mother used willow bark for headaches, a simple, effective remedy, and recognizes that true wisdom often lives not in great books, but in close watching of the natural world. Such knowledge was a peasant woman's most precious inheritance, shared in whispers and shadowed always by the fear of witchcraft accusations, a subtle, real threat that hovered over wise women. The scents of raw flax, smoke and sweat mingle, and Ilara senses the Middle Ages' double image of the female body, bearer of life and healing, yet also a source of fear and suspicion, especially when it reaches beyond what's expected to know. She looks at her own hands, hands that spin for sustenance and now guard a healing law, and feels a deep, steady reflection on identity and power. She recalls a story from another village of a woman named Serafina, punished for trying to end an unwanted pregnancy with herbs, an act branded a grave crime by church and law alike. The fragility of bodily autonomy and the severity of its consequences form a dark truth no song or fairy tale would name. The thought weighs on Ilara, and she locks her questions and her secrets tight within herself, like the valerian sealed in its clay jar. The sun slips lower, the light that enters is thinner, colder. The sense of a day running out pushes her hands to move faster. Time is her narrowest, most precious resource. The last work sound she hears is Mattis at the loom, still dressing the warp, before she turns to preparing the evening meal. That shift marks the passage from outward labor to inward, homebound work. Ilara knows a peasant woman's greatest power is the quiet mastery of household and sustenance. Her strength isn't displayed, it's lived. The cabin, small, crowded, orderly, warm, stands as proof of her craft. In contemplating this simple, well-kept haven, she finds a serenity that rises above the era's hardships. Within this ordered space, she finds her peace. Twilight settles swiftly over Shadowvale, and the dim light that lingers inside the cabin forces Ilara to relight the oil lamp, its sharp, greasy scent filling the air and wrestling with the lingering aroma of smoke and flax. The sounds of night rise, a chorus of crickets, the distant bark of a guard dog, wrapping the valley in a hushed, familiar rhythm. Ilara turns to the hearth, preparing a thick soup with the few vegetables and bones they've managed to gather, a kind of rustic alchemy that turns scarcity into sustenance. The warmth of the fire becomes the heart of her little universe. Preparing the meal is a quiet ritual, each motion part of a rhythm that steadies her thoughts, the chopping of vegetables, the gentle stirring of the pot. She reflects on the contrast between her spinning and Mattis's weaving, two cycles that complete each other yet belong to separate realms. The man works in the visible physical world. The woman governs the invisible, unending labor of the home. It's a cultural truth that this division was rigid in the countryside, yet a woman's skill at spinning or weaving often determined her dowry's worth, and by extension, the kind of marriage she could make. The bubbling pot is the only sound as she watches the steam rise, condensing on the thatched ceiling, a reminder of the cabin's constant dampness, an ever-present threat to health. Her fingers brush the rough clay of the wall, still holding the day's warmth. This small house, kept warm and fed, is her quiet triumph, her unseen contribution to their survival. In the deepening stillness of routine, Ilara discovers a shadowed beauty, an acceptance without full surrender. She remembers the older widows of the village, who kept their homes and fields alive through sheer endurance, spinning late into the night, selling herbs and handmade goods. Their resilience feels like a lesson whispered through time. Dependence on a husband was never absolute. The soup's aroma thickens, fragrant with leeks and roots promising fullness. Weariness gathers in her shoulders, but she allows herself a moment's rest, closing her eyes, basking in the gentle heat. It's a moment outside time, where the world's noise fades, leaving only the calm of stirring food, that timeless act of love and necessity. Mattis, having returned from tidying his tools, steps closer, drawn by the scent. The soft tread of his boots wakes her from her reverie. His touch on her shoulder is brief, more a sign of shared fatigue than affection, and he settles near the hearth, watching the flames in a silence that feels full rather than empty, the quiet understanding of two lives built side by side. The sun is gone now. Darkness presses close outside, except for the golden glow spilling through the cabin window. Firelight paints Matisse's face in gentle tones, an honest man's face, shaped by labor and patience. Ilara doesn't love him with the fire of legends, but with the steady affection of shared survival, a pragmatic love that underpinned most marriages in the 13th century. The soup's steam warms her face, soothing her. She remembers her morning with Agnes, the healer's secret knowledge, and realizes that true wisdom is healing both body and spirit. Small acts of kindness and shared knowledge are what make life bearable. The valerian root, hidden in its clay pot, feels like a symbol of that silent feminine strength. Their table, a plank balanced on two supports, is set with the few earthen bowls they own. The faint scrape of clay on wood joins the night's music. The soup's scent fills the room, promising a brief, comforting pause before sleep. To Ilara, this simple, steaming meal is a blessing, a fragile moment of security in a world of hunger and uncertainty. They eat in reverent silence, savoring every mouthful of thick broth. The soup's warmth on her hands and tongue feels like grace itself. The soft sounds of chewing and breathing become a humble hymn to sustenance. In this act of eating together, the couple reaffirms their union, their quiet defiance against the harshness beyond their door, a moment of deep, wordless intimacy. The meal ends quickly. Matisse rises to inspect the loom one last time before bed, giving a final habitual touch to the linen. Ilara rinses the bowls with a handful of straw and the cold water she fetched that morning, her fingers stinging from the chill. The water's touch reminds her of life's endless cycle, labor that never ceases yet sustains. Soon, the sweet, calming scent of chamomile fills the air. Ilara reaches for Agnes's small jar, breaking off a piece of valerian root and tossing it onto the embers. Its earthy smoke curls upward, her secret connection to the healer, a promise of dreamless sleep and strength for the next day. The valerian smoke drifts through the cabin like a veil, while the fire's gentle crackle is the last sound before they lie down. The touch of linen over straw is rough but familiar. Shadows dance across the wall as the lamp fades, flickering, stretching, then gone. Ilara settles beside Matisse, and his warmth gathers around her. Safety, complete and wordless. She closes her eyes, her mind still full of the day's images and Agnes's unspoken wisdom, drifting into sleep where the boundaries of reality blur and hope mingles with hardship. Silence envelops them, broken only by the rhythm of their breathing. Darkness soothes her tired eyes. The day's weight dissolves, carried away by valerian smoke and hearth heat. Rest is her reward, dreaming, her brief freedom, a wide, open field where she can command her own fate. The last image in her mind is the morning dew at the village spring, where she met Agnes, a moment of connection that anchors her serenity. The quiet wisdom of women bound to the earth is her truest inheritance. And so, beneath unseen stars, in deep, restorative sleep, Ilara finds strength in resilience, peace in simplicity, and calm in the night that cradles her. It's still night, but the air over Shadowvale carries the weight of change. Ilara wakes with a quiet unease, her body a little more rested than usual, perhaps thanks to the valerian root that had smouldered through the night, its earthy, narcotic scent still clinging to the linen bedding. Today is a day of transition. Matisse will leave for the market in Old Bridge, a journey that breaks the rhythm of village life and fills Ilara with an unfamiliar solitude. one heavy with extra work, yet touched by a fleeting sense of freedom, free from the silent watchfulness of husband and community. She rises and carefully stirs the fire back to life, feeling the roughness of cold charcoal against her fingers. The sound of flames waking is the first sound of day. The dense, comforting smell of peat smoke fills the cabin once more. She must prepare a solid meal for Mattis, something that will sustain him through the long, perilous road ahead. Unpaved, uncertain, and alive with medieval dangers. Bandits, wild weather, and the simple risk of losing one's way. Breakfast is barley porridge and a small piece of rye bread, a modest portion that reminds her of the careful economy ruling their lives. Nothing wasted, ever. Matthis, already dressing, pulls on his thickest jerkin and checks the saddlebags. Inside them lies the folded flax that Ilara spun through countless hours. Thread turned into trade, the only currency they truly possess. The weight of the fabric, born of their labor, is his only assurance of safety and purpose. Ilara watches him, her face a mixture of pride and quiet worry. Matthis is no warrior, he's a craftsman, and his trip to Old Bridge is his version of adventure, his encounter with the wider world in service of their survival. Peasant traders like him often traveled in small groups or caravans, both for protection and for the exchange of knowledge, safe routes, fair prices, the shifting values of distant coins, a simple vital web of rural intelligence. His absence will leave a hollow space in the cabin, 3 days of silence, and she'll bear every task alone, tending the goat, fetching water, guarding the home through the dark hours. She accepts this with calm resolve. The cold morning air slips in through the open door as he readies the horse. The sound of reins and hooves on wet earth becomes the melody of departure, a music made of uncertainty and hope. Their farewell is brief, a rough touch of calloused hands, a meeting of eyes heavy with understanding. In these times, open affection between peasants was rare, but their bond speaks through simplicity, through the unspoken promise of return. Ilara stands at the doorway, watching Mattis fade into the mist that still clings to the valley. The sound of hooves grows faint, then vanishes. The cabin feels suddenly larger, colder, its silence almost physical. Ilara exhales deeply, a sigh of both release and resolve. Then she moves to clean and order the space, her hands gliding over the familiar linen cloth as she wipes soot and dust from the table. The faint smell of burnt oil from the lamp lingers, a scent of wakefulness, of watch kept alone. She takes Agnes's small jar in her hands, feeling the chill of the clay, and gazes at the piece of valerian root inside, a reminder of the secret knowledge she shares with the healer. This solitude is her chance, to spin in peace, to perhaps visit Agnes again under the pretext of seeking better sleep, but truly to learn more about herbs and self-reliance. The jar becomes her new focus, her symbol of inward movement. Her curiosity turns outward to the architecture of the village. The houses, like hers, are made of clay and thatch with a single room. Every piece of furniture is arranged to trap warmth and keep danger out. In winter, animals often slept in a small adjoining stall, their body heat helping to warm the living space, a habit unsanitary by modern thought, but essential for survival. That closeness, cramped yet secure, is part of her world's fabric. A sharp wind whistles through the hills, carrying the damp, clean scent of soil and forest. Ilara settles at her spindle once more. The soft hum of the spinning wheel fills the silence left by Mattis's absent loom, a feminine, steady rhythm that anchors her to the earth and holds loneliness at bay. It is the only music in the cabin now, the quiet, patient sound of a woman spinning her own sense of stability from the threads of the morning. The midday sun leans westward, and the heat within the cabin gathers, a brief reprieve before the chill of afternoon. Ilara finishes spinning the first bundle of flax, feeling the quiet satisfaction that comes from steady work. With Mattis gone, she eats her midday meal quickly, a modest piece of rye bread and goat cheese, free from the usual small talk or pauses, eager to make use of the daylight before setting out toward the forest to find Agnes. The pungent, salty scent of the cheese mingles with the dry aroma of flax, an essence of thrift and endurance. She wraps herself in her thick woolen cloak, feeling its heavy warmth, and picks up an empty basket, a simple, plausible reason for walking through the village should anyone question her. The real purpose of her visit, to seek deeper knowledge from the healer, must remain unspoken. Her boots make soft sounds on the earth, yet in Mattis's absence, even the rustle of her cloak against her legs seems louder. Under the pale autumn sun, the village appears half asleep, caught in the unchanging rhythm of rural life. As she leaves the last cottages behind, the smell of peat smoke fades, replaced by the cool, damp fragrance of fallen leaves and forest soil, a scent alive with mystery. The narrow path to Agnes's cabin is slick with moss, and Ilara feels the spongy give beneath her leather soles, a grounding reminder that she's entering wilder ground, beyond the tidy, ploughed borders of the fields. The wind hums faintly in the treetops, and light filters through the oak leaves in a shifting mosaic of gold and shadow, lending the sense that she's crossing into another realm, one where feudal laws and the church's authority feel less certain. Agnes's house soon appears, built of rough logs and crowned with bundles of drying herbs. It blends so naturally into the forest that it seems part of it, half hidden, as though only those meant to find it ever do. Ilara knocks softly with her knuckles, a hesitant sound. The scent that escapes the doorframe is rich and heady, crushed roots, smoke, and dry hay. From inside comes Agnes's low, steady voice, inviting her in. The interior is an assault of warmth and fragrance, the air thick with herbal steam, shelves lined with clay jars, bundles of plants hanging from the rafters. It's less a home than a living workshop, a place of power and empirical wisdom. Agnes leans over a wooden bowl, grinding leaves with a pestle, her focus unwavering. It gives Ilara time to observe the sure rhythm of the woman's movements, the texture of her hands, the grace in their certainty. The healer explains that she's preparing a balm for the laborers' aching backs, a reminder of how common such ailments were in medieval life, where endless physical toil met little knowledge of rest or posture. Ilara gives her practiced excuse, persistent fatigue, trouble sleeping, but her eyes betray her true intent. They linger on Agnes's hands, on the calm authority that radiates from her. The healer smiles faintly, a knowing smile, and gestures for Ilara to sit on a small wooden stool. The wood, polished smooth by years of use, feels unexpectedly soft beneath her fingers, a stark contrast to the rough timber of her own home. Agnes begins describing a treatment for a village woman plagued by night fevers, willow bark tea, and a light diet. Yet beneath her practical words lies another layer, a lesson in patience, observation, and restraint. The steady rhythm of the pestle against the bowl becomes the heartbeat of this teaching. When Agnes finally looks up, her gaze meets Ilara's with quiet understanding. She doesn't mention Mattis. Instead, she speaks of winter plants, those that hide their strength beneath the snow. The metaphor isn't lost on Ilara. A woman's endurance, too, must be hidden and preserved in silence. The balm's aroma, animal fat mixed with wild mint, spreads through the air, both medicinal and mysterious. Ilara realizes that Agnes's true lesson isn't about any single herb, but about trusting one's senses, one's instincts, and nature itself. It's a step toward independence, a defiance of the unspoken rule that a wife's survival depends entirely on husband or priest. The image of the healer, serene and self-sufficient in her secluded hut, becomes a quiet ideal in Ilara's mind. Their meeting ends in peaceful silence. Agnes repeats her advice. Burn the valerian each night. Watch the rhythms of your own body. Her cool, steady hand on Ilara's arm feels like a benediction. Ilara leaves, her basket still empty, yet her thoughts brimming with new clarity and strength. Stepping back into the forest air, she feels the shock of cold after the herbal warmth within. Her footsteps fall with new confidence on the mossy path. The basket in her hand feels weightless, because what she carries now cannot be seen. The faint outline of the village appears ahead, bathed in fading autumn light. But to Ilara, it's no longer just a place to endure. It's a world to understand, and one day to master. Evening descends swiftly over Shadowvale, the air cooling as the pale blue sky fades into shades of grey and rose, a quiet prelude to the night's chill. Ilara walks back toward the cabin, the cold slipping beneath her cloak, though the warmth of her new thoughts glows within her like a hidden ember. The familiar scent of smoke and flax welcomes her home, and the sight of Mattis's silent loom, frozen mid-task, no longer feels lonely. It's full now, full of what she has learned. Her gaze turns inward to something deeply personal, her spindle. The slender tool, both humble and sacred, lies waiting near the hearth. She picks it up, feeling the smoothness of its oak wood, polished by her hands, light yet perfectly balanced between her fingers. It's more than an instrument. It's an extension of her body, a symbol of autonomy and survival. Every thread it creates is a measure of her worth, her unseen contribution to their fragile economy. The spindle was carved by Mattis long ago, a wedding gift both practical and affectionate. Its weight is slight, but its meaning vast. As she rolls it gently between her fingers, the soft whisper of flax pulling free hums in the air, a sound steady and soothing, the heartbeat of her day. She remembers how her mother used to kiss her spindle before working, a small ritual, a blessing to make the thread strong and plentiful. The gesture brings to mind a story of Margot, the village's eldest spinner, who refused to adopt the spinning wheel, still clinging to spindle and distaff. She believed the hand's rhythm made purer thread, a remnant of an older age. Though the wheel had begun to spread through parts of Europe in the 13th century, Margot's stubborn pride turned her tool into an heirloom of resistance, a defense of the old ways against the creeping tide of change. Ilara sets the spindle aside and tends the fire, feeling the comforting blaze on her skin. The smell of dry wood deepens around her. But her thoughts are still in Agnes's hut, the way the healer treated each leaf and root with reverence as though the forest itself were scripture. That sacred respect for nature has settled into Ilara's mind like a quiet revelation. She feels herself now part of that secret understanding. Keeping the fire safe is her nightly duty, one that carries a deep awareness of risk. In villages like Shadowvale, fire was both lifeline and danger. A single ember could undo a lifetime's labor. Women were its keepers, ensuring it was banked or quenched before sleep. Ilara pours a bit of water around the hearth, watching the earth hiss faintly beneath the droplets. Her eyes return to the spindle. She lifts it once more, not to spin, but simply to hold it, to feel its smooth body and what it represents. She wonders about all the women who came before her, whose fingers had shaped thread under the same faint light, whose labor filled the silence of centuries. Through this single piece of wood, their stories hum, invisible yet unbroken. Night folds over the valley. Outside, the world turns black and cold, but the cabin glows with firelight and calm. Ilara sits close to the flames, the familiar earthy scent of valerian drifting upward from the hearth. Mattis's absence no longer feels like loss. It feels like space. In that space, She senses the slow forming of something new, herself, apart from duty or title, beyond wife or servant. The spindle rests across her lap. The flicker of the fire paints the wood in amber hues. Its plainness mirrors her life, devoid of ornament but rich in endurance. When she sets it spinning, the gentle hum that fills the air feels like her own private conversation with the world, a rhythm she alone commands. The repetitive, meditative work frees her thoughts. She reflects on Agnes's lessons, the burden of secret knowledge, not of guilt, but of guardianship. That hidden wisdom sets her apart from the others in the village, yet binds her invisibly to a lineage of women who broke rules quietly, just to heal, to endure, to know. She thinks of her dowry, linens spun by her and her mother, and of how each thread carried the memory of their touch. Peasant linen, she knows, was often stronger and finer than the fabric woven in towns, for every fibre was handled with patience, not haste. The fire's shadows dance across the wall, moving in time with the flame's breath. The cabin seems to pulse softly, alive with warmth and scent. Ilara focuses on the delicate task of drawing the fibres evenly, coaxing rough flax into supple thread. To feel the strand strengthen beneath her hands is to feel mastery itself, quiet, steadfast, real. Beyond the walls, the wind sings through the trees. The cold out there reminds her of what's at stake, the thin line between survival and want. The spindle in her hand becomes not just a tool, but a weapon against winter's hunger, a defense forged of patience and skill. She recalls hearing once of spinning festivals, where women competed for speed and finesse, their laughter echoing across the fields. For a brief time, their craft, usually unseen, confined to homes, was celebrated in daylight. The image warms her, a circle of women, united in strength and rhythm, weaving both thread and sisterhood. Belonging to that unseen fellowship, the long chain of women who spin, heal, and endure, gives Ilara's spirit quiet rest. The smell of smoke, flax, and valerian fills the cabin, a perfume of work and wisdom. She watches the spindle whirl one last time, its soft hum hypnotic, a whisper of creation itself. It turns raw fibre into something lasting, just as her labour turns hardship into dignity. Her thoughts drift to her small garden, the soil cold but generous, and she sees how its rhythm mirrors her spinning, from earth to thread, from hand to sustenance. The mingled scent of earth and flax is the fragrance of her life, of persistence made tangible. The hearth's warmth lulls her. The house, emptied of the loom's clatter, breathes a deep peace. Agnes's words echo faintly in her mind, of tending one's body, one's inner rhythm. The spindle now feels almost like an amulet, a charm for balance and endurance. She remembers her grandmother's tale, how she'd married with nothing but her spindle, and with it had built her home, thread by thread. The memory kindles a soft pride. Holding the same kind of tool, Ilara feels herself part of that quiet, unbroken lineage. The cabin, her small world, is no longer a cage, but a refuge, sustained by her labour and her learning. The spindle, the fire, the jar of herbs, all are pieces of a life she shapes with her own hands. Outside, the wind subsides, the village falls into sleep. Ilara finishes her day's spinning, placing the spindle and the neat coil of thread in their place by the wall. The sight of the pile, soft and shining, is proof of her diligence, a quiet monument to survival. Peace settles in her chest. The warmth, the scent, the silence wrap around her like a woven cloak. She gazes at the spindle one last time, the emblem of her unyielding strength. Then she lies down, the chill of the linen soon replaced by the warmth of the bed and the faint fragrance of chamomile. Sleep takes her gently, her final thought resting on the spindle, waiting for her again at dawn, to begin another day of creation and quiet resilience. Her peace is complete. Dawn breaks over Shadowvale, and the second day of Mathis's absence begins with an unusual stillness, the silence of the idle loom marking the difference more than anything else. Ilara wakes naturally before sunrise, feeling how the night's chill has settled deep into the air. The scent is crisp and clean, broken only by the faint trace of smoke from the hearth. The rough touch of cool linen against her skin is her first reminder of the day. She moves with quiet efficiency. The morning ritual, the tending of the fire, is swifter now, with no husband to serve, no journey to prepare. The sound of water in the pot, the crackle of kindling, every noise belongs to her alone. Each movement feels deliberate, hers to command. The dim cabin, still wrapped in shadow, feels like a small sanctuary of labor, and she its solitary priestess. After a quick meal, and tending to the goat and small garden, Ilara turns to her spinning with intense focus, the kind of concentration that only solitude allows. The hum of the spindle fills the room, steady and sure, her only companion. In those times, women often turned domestic silence into something richer, repeating healing chants, recalling old tales, or whispering fragments of prophecy, a secret cultivation of mind beneath the guise of work. Yet her thoughts drift toward what she learned the day before. Agnès had spoken of chamomile for easing coughs, and now, curiosity guiding her, Ilara decides to attempt her first small experiment. Her heart quickens as she rises, bare feet brushing the packed earth, and goes to her modest shelf of herbs. She selects a handful of sage, common enough, used for soup and seasoning, but Agnès had mentioned its hidden gift, a power to reduce swelling and soothe pain. The dried leaves look ordinary, yet they carry a new weight in Ilara's eyes. Their menthol scent rises sharply, stirring her senses awake. She sets water to boil in a clay pot, the steam warming her face as she drops in the leaves. The bubbling sound becomes the music of her small act of alchemy. She knows well that if anyone found her brewing herbs beyond their accepted purpose, whispers of witchcraft could follow. Fear of such things still lingered in every village shadow. Ilara steps back to let the infusion cool. The tension between what is proper and what is forbidden sends a quiet thrill through her. She tastes it, the tea bitter and earthy on her tongue, and the feeling of doing something by knowledge rather than chance fills her with a rare, steady pride. For the first time she feels her will shaping the tangible world. The rest of the morning passes in rhythm with her spindle again, though the work feels subtly changed. The touch of flax beneath her fingers is firmer, her motions surer. As the neat coils of thread build before her, she sees not just material progress, but the weaving of her inner growth, something no one could take away. When midday comes, she eats alone, and the sight of the empty table brings reflection rather than loneliness. Silence, she realizes, is not punishment, it's permission. The smell of rye bread fills the air, the scent of her own self-sufficiency. The sage still lingers faintly in her body, leaving her sharper, more alive. As the afternoon stretches on, Ilara turns to tasks Mathis would never notice, mending sheets, arranging utensils, restoring quiet order. The rhythmic pricking of the needle through linen forms a soft, steady counterpoint to her thoughts. She considers these unseen labors as sacred as the weaving or the tilling, acts that sustain, though no one praises them. The needle pricks lightly against her fingertips. She thinks of Gisela, the neighbor who lost her baby to fever, and the grief that blanketed the village. A quiet vow forms in her heart, to learn more from Agnès, not for ambition, but to serve, to help. The thought feels heavier than duty. It feels like purpose. As dusk nears, the light in the cabin dims. She lights the oil lamp early, its flame trembling. The scent of olive oil thickens the air, and her shadow stretches long and solitary across the wall. but she feels no fear in it. Instead, a sense of wholeness settles over her. She is the keeper of this space, the flame, the warmth, the order. The role of guardian sits heavily, yet with dignity. Mattis's warnings about wolves and thieves echo faintly in her memory. A distant dog's bark pulls her to the door. She feels the cold slipping through the cracks, checks the latch, and breathes deep. Her heart is steady. Night deepens. Ilara makes a simple soup, the warmth of the broth wrapping her in comfort. She eats slowly, savoring the flavors, mindful of every bite. This quiet meal feels like a luxury, a moment that belongs entirely to her. Later, she kneels by the hearth for her nightly ritual of learning. She takes a small piece of valerian root from Agnès's pouch, its earthy scent rising as she sets it to the embers. The smoke coils upward, carrying knowledge and calm. The crackling fire becomes the night's final sound. Ilara lies down, the straw of her bedding familiar beneath her, her body heavy with the good fatigue of labor and secret study. The darkness around her feels protective, not empty. Sleep comes quickly. Her last thought is of tomorrow, the third day of Mattis's absence, when she'll return to Agnès for deeper learning. The faint scent of valerian drifts over her as she drifts away, promising untroubled dreams and strength for what's to come. Under the linen, her body hums with quiet energy, the kind born of purpose. She is no longer only the weaver's wife. She is the guardian, the spinner, the secret apprentice of green medicine. In her solitude, she has found her strength. The third day without Mattis dawns pale and cold over Shadowvale, the air thick and heavy, carrying the promise of rain. Ilara moves through her morning routine with quiet fluency, yet there's an undercurrent of urgency in her rhythm. She wants to make the most of her solitude before her husband's return at dusk. The scent of fire and barley porridge is the only warmth in the chill morning, a small comfort against the creeping cold. Her footsteps echo faintly across the empty cabin. When the spinning is done, she decides today's visit to Agnès will be under the guise of a trip to the village centre. She must pass through the small weekly market, a thin bridge between her secluded life and the wider world of exchange. Ilara wraps herself in her thick wool cloak, feeling its protective weight. In the dull reflection of the animal skin window, her own image looks steadier, more solemn. Her basket, now filled with neatly coiled flax thread, serves both her practical and hidden purposes, part of it for trade with the travelling apothecary, if he's there today, and part for her continued learning with Agnès. A handful of salt or rare herbs would be a fine reward. In these times, both were as precious as silver. The road to the market is livelier than usual. She hears the creak of wagons, the rise and fall of human voices. As she nears the square, the air thickens with scent, fresh bread, damp wool, manure, salted meat and dried fish, an overwhelming mosaic that reminds her of the crowded pulse of community life. The sight of the square itself, full of rough wooden stalls and busy figures trading, stands in sharp contrast to the quiet order of her cabin. The market is the village's heartbeat. Here, peasants barter their modest surpluses, eggs, cheese, woven goods, for what they cannot make themselves, iron tools, salt, a taste of distant spices. Though women were bound by law to their husbands' names, it was they who kept the rhythm of household trade, managing the flow of daily goods and coins. Their influence was practical, not official, but it was power nonetheless. Ilara walked slowly among them, her basket balanced on her arm, listening. Complaints ripple through the crowd about the next tithe Lord Valerius will demand after the harvest. The weight of feudal oppression is visible in the tense set of shoulders, in voices lowered but sharp. Somewhere nearby, a minstrel strums a melancholy tune about a lost love, an echo of beauty amid the hardness of survival. She stops at the stall of the travelling apothecary, a thin man named Gautier who wanders between villages selling ointments, spices, and tiny carved charms. The rich scent of cloves and cinnamon fills the air around him, a fragrance from faraway lands, from ships and cities she'll never see. Gautier greets her with a faint smile of recognition. They exchange words, then goods. She offers her spun linen, and Gautier runs the fine thread between his fingers, impressed by its evenness. They bargain quietly, each weighing value with care. She stands firm. Matisse would expect nothing less, and soon thread becomes salt and dried pepper, small luxuries that hold great worth. As Gautier measures the salt, he mentions how the drought has made travel perilous and crops uncertain. Many villages can no longer produce flax at all, he says, which has driven the price of fine linen higher than ever. The thought unsettles Ilara. Her fortune and Matisse's rests partly on the hardship of others. Such was the balance of their world, survival through another's scarcity. With her basket lighter of thread but heavier with trade, Ilara feels a quiet satisfaction. Salt and pepper, humble treasures, will season their food and preserve their meat through the coming cold. She touches the rough crystals in her palm, marveling at how something so small could connect her to the vast sea and the distant merchants who risked their lives to bring it inland. Leaving the market behind, she turns down the path that leads into the forest. The dirt road feels softer beneath her boots, and with each step, the noise of the crowd fades until only the whisper of wind remains. The basket she carries is heavy, but it's not the salt or the spice that truly weighs upon her. It's the secret, her growing bond with Agnès, the knowledge waiting in the forest, that defines her purpose now. Ahead, the trees rise dark and inviting, their branches bending like open arms. The forest calls her toward that quiet world of independence and understanding, a world entirely her own. Night had settled over Shadow Vale, and Matisse had finally returned from Old Bridge, carrying with him the scent of the road, dust, sweat, and the faint tang of city air. Ilara had prepared their home for his return, and now, after supper, a hush had descended upon the small cabin. The rhythm of shared life resumed, though something within it had changed. An unspoken understanding had taken root within her. The loom was still, and only the steady sound of their breathing filled the room, the lamp's trembling light painting long, protective shadows on the walls. It was a moment of rest and reflection, the kind of silence that allows the mind to drift freely. Ilara lay beside Matisse, the warmth of his body comforting after days of solitude, yet her thoughts wandered to the bustle of the market, to the stillness of Agnès's forest hut. The linen Matisse had sold was now transformed into coins and coloured wool, proof that their labour had worth. But beneath their bed, hidden in a clay jar, rested her true wealth, meadow sweet and a single secret seed. Matisse spoke little, content after a successful journey. He told her of the noise of the harbour, the rude haste of merchants, and the stern face of the tax collector who guarded the bridge. He grumbled about the stench of the port, but described with quiet pride the merchant who had bought nearly all their thread, praising its smoothness. Then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned the grand new bell being forged for the cathedral, a brief glimpse of the church's splendour standing against the poverty of those who built it. Ilara listened, smiling faintly, though her thoughts strayed to Lyra, her friend who still suffered from pains the healers ignored. The memory stirred a story of its own, how women's ailments were dismissed, their suffering normalized, while the wisdom of healers like Agnès offered their only real relief. The injustice of it settled deep in her chest, heavier than pity. It was a call to action. Turning on the straw mattress, she felt the faint rustle of the linen she herself had spun. The rough texture grounded her, a reminder of her craft and her body's quiet power. Matisse's scent, smoke, sweat, and the faint trace of travel was both familiar and grounding. It reminded her of the web of necessity that bound them together, partnership, endurance, and the small tendernesses of survival. Mattis soon drifted into deep sleep, his breathing steady and loud. Ilara used the soft rhythm as her own kind of meditation. She thought of the meadow sweet tucked safely beneath the bed and of its power to soothe Lyra's suffering. The image of the pale, dried blossoms filled her mind, a beacon in the dark, a symbol of her ability to help, to act, to know. She thought, too, of the salt Mattis had brought home, a small bag of coarse crystals, shining like treasure. In these times, salt was both wealth and preservation. Yet while Matisse prized it as proof of trade and success, Ilara understood that true security lay not in salt or coins, but in knowledge, in the ability to heal, to sustain life with one's own hands. Her eyes closed, and her mind returned to the memory of Agnès, the filtered forest light, the sharp scent of balm, the steady touch that had placed a seed in her palm. That vision brought her a peace deeper than rest, a sense of belonging to something greater than herself, to a silent lineage of women who used knowledge as power and compassion as defiance. The faint whistle of wind through the chimney was the last sound she heard before sleep crept in. But before surrendering to it fully, she shaped a quiet plan in her thoughts. Tomorrow she would visit Lyra under the pretense of neighborly concern and secretly deliver the meadow sweet, repeating Agnès's words with the same careful reverence. The simple act of passing on healing felt as sacred as any prayer. As she drifted toward sleep, her mind filled with gentle symbols, the spindle, the salt, the hidden herbs, all merging into a tapestry of visible labor and invisible power. Her peace was not the peace of rest, but of purpose, a quiet engine of resistance turning within her heart. The cabin around them glowed with a tender warmth. The peat smoke still lingered in the air, carrying the scent of safety. Ilara touched the linen sheet against her skin, feeling the familiar texture she had created with her own hands, a reminder of her creative strength and her control over her world. A beam of moonlight slipped through the small window crack, falling across the clay jar hidden below. Beyond that light was darkness, the world of lords, tithes and plague, but here, within her small home of mud and straw, she possessed an invisible treasure. Knowledge. Her fingers brushed the cool clay, and a quiet power settled in her chest. Her thoughts wandered gently, touching on the women she had known, the cooper's wife who fled to a convent, the widow who ploughed her own fields, and now Lyra, enduring her pain in silence. Ilara saw clearly that the quiet union of such women was the true strength of the village, the invisible fabric that held the world together. Outside, the wind stilled, and Shadowvale sank into perfect silence. The faint, sweet trace of valerian still lingered from her nightly ritual, a promise of unbroken sleep and a calm spirit for the day ahead. Ilara's last waking thought was of Lyra's face, soft with relief and gratitude. Helping her friend would be as vital as spinning the finest thread, an act of creation through compassion. She remembered how, in winter, women gathered by the great fires to spin together, working through the night to meet the feudal taxes. Yet those long evenings were more than labor. They were communion, moments where laughter and secrets wove through the sound of spinning wheels. Matisse stirred in his sleep, his hand brushing her arm. The gesture was unthinking, but gentle, and Ilara smiled faintly in the dark. She was his partner, yes, but within her burned a quiet independence, a light of her own making. A distant rooster called too early, reminding her that dawn was already on its way. Ilara did not fear the coming day. She welcomed it. The scent of flax and earth, her world's foundation, filled her lungs, and her heart was steady. The darkness softened around her, and the cabin became a cocoon of safety and purpose. In this fragile balance of labor, love, and hidden knowledge, Ilara found her peace. The linen beneath her cheek, the warmth beside her, and the secret beneath the bed were all part of the same truth. She was both the keeper and the creator of her world. Morning sunlight spills into the cabin, lighting up the bundles of spun flax, the pile of dyed wool Martis brought back from town, and the loom waiting to be set in motion again. Ilara rises with renewed strength. The crisp air and faint trace of smoke carry the promise of a day shaped not by survival, but by compassion. As she moves through her morning tasks, her mind remains fixed on her plan, her calm determination humming beneath every gesture. The quiet reflection of the previous night gives way to discreet action. She retrieves the clay jar from beneath the bed, its surface cool beneath her fingertips, and takes a small handful of dried meadow-sweet leaves. The sweet, medicinal scent is faint but distinct. She hides the bundle in a handkerchief tied at her waist, beneath her apron, an invisible token of purpose. The rhythmic clatter of Mattis's loom becomes her cover. His focus on the work ensures her freedom to move unseen. Her excuse for leaving is simple: visiting Gisela, the ailing neighbor. It's the perfect alibi for her true mission. Ilara steps outside, the cold air biting her cheeks, her footsteps quick against the packed earth. The autumn sunlight lays a pale sheen over the village, a place she knows intimately, yet now sees as a map of hidden griefs. She walks toward the home of Lyra, the blacksmith's wife, who lives slightly beyond the village center. Ilara carries her pretext like a veil, asking after Gisela when Lyra opens the door. But what greets her instead is the sight of exhaustion carved deep into her friend's face. The smell of soot and iron fills the air. The sound of hammer against anvil rings ceaselessly from the forge outside, an oppressive music of endless labor. The two women sit near the fire, the heat almost too strong after the chill outside. Lyra speaks in a low, trembling voice of the pain in her joints, of the cold that won't leave her bones, and of her husband's indifference. Her story is quiet but familiar. In their world, a woman's worth was measured by how long she could work, and illness was both a physical and an economic curse, something endured, not treated. In that fragile moment of honesty, Ilara acts. She leans closer, her hand brushing Lyra's arm, a gesture of comfort, but also of trust. Her voice drops to a whisper as she speaks of Agnes and the meadow-sweet. Untying the hidden cloth, she reveals the delicate leaves, their pale color soft in the firelight. Lyra's eyes widen, disbelief mingling with hope. Ilara explains how to brew the tea, to take it slowly, and above all, to keep it secret. Her voice is barely audible beneath the hammer's steady rhythm outside. Lyra accepts the herb with reverence, her gratitude too deep for words. The faint, sweet scent of the leaves fills the space between them, a scent of mercy. She understands the risk her friend is taking, the danger of sharing knowledge that skirts the edge of forbidden lore. What passes between them in that instant is more than healing. It's solidarity, an invisible alliance. Ilara hasn't just given an herb, she's passed on wisdom, power wrapped in simplicity. That exchange, quiet as a prayer, is the heart of women's resistance, the preservation of life and knowledge in defiance of silence. She stays a little longer, reinforcing the instructions and the need for caution. The rhythmic pounding from the forge becomes a strange accompaniment to their hidden ritual of care. When she finally stands to leave, her heart feels full, not with pride, but with peace, the deep calm of someone who has done what was right. Their eyes meet, and in that gaze a silent promise: we will meet again. The walk home feels different, lighter. The weight of the meadow-sweet is gone, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. The village, under the muted daylight, seems less like a place of suffering and more like one of quiet endurance, where healing can take root unseen. Back in the cabin, Mattis is lost in the rhythm of the loom, the shuttle sliding back and forth like a heartbeat. Ilara takes up her spindle, and the soft hum of her spinning joins his in harmony. The smell of raw flax rises around her, familiar, grounding, and now tinged with deeper meaning. Her hands repeat the same movements as always, but she spins not just thread now. She spins resilience. The sun drifts westward. The day slips into its familiar rhythm of work and fatigue. Ilara feels tired, but it's the kind of tired that soothes rather than drains. The clay jar beneath the bed now holds only valerian and a single seed, the remnants of her secret trove. She glances toward it, and the sight steadies her, a quiet symbol of strength and defiance. Her thoughts settle on what she's learned, that real power lies in knowledge, in kindness shared quietly between women who refuse to let hardship define them. In the grand design of the feudal world, she is only one thread, but one woven with purpose, connecting her to a lineage of healers unseen by lords or priests. As dusk gathers, the scent of evening soup fills the cabin, mingling with the warmth of the fire. Ilara feels the deep, wordless satisfaction of having brought comfort to another soul. In her mind's eye, she sees Lyra's hands holding the meadow sweet, her face softened by relief. That image is her peace for the night, a vision of healing passed from one woman to another, gentle and enduring as the turning of the wheel. A new day begins over Shadowvale, but this one unfolds through a different lens, seen from above and afar by a man whose life runs parallel to the villagers. Brother Lucian, a 33-year-old scribe of the fortified abbey of Sanctus Fervidus, perched high upon the hills that overlook the valley in the 13th century. Clad in coarse, dark wool, carrying the faint scent of parchment, ink, and incense in his skin, Lucian is a man of words and faith, detached from the toil of the fields, yet a precise observer of their rhythm. The deep hum of the monk's morning office reverberates through the cold stone vaults, a slow, solemn pulse that defines the hours of his life. Lucian sits in his narrow cell, bent over an aged botanical manuscript. The steady glide of his quill across the page, patient, deliberate, almost reverent, mirrors Ilara's spinning wheel far below. Both acts are repetitive, both demand silence and devotion. As the abbey's record-keeper, Lucian's duty is to catalogue the holdings and taxes of the fief. From his window, the village below appears as a cluster of thatched roofs, a smudge of smoke in the valley haze. Its people exist to him as entries in neat columns, heads of cattle, bundles of flax, sacks of rye. He doesn't see faces, only figures. That distance defines his understanding of the world. Born to a ruined minor noble house, Lucian had been sent to the abbey as a boy, trading sword and soil for quill and prayer. His hands are soft, his mind disciplined. His spectacles, framed in metal he once repaired himself, magnify eyes sharpened by endless reading. He believes in order, in the written word. Yet today, his pen falters. The manuscript before him describes in careful Latin the healing virtues of meadowsweet and valerian, and warns of their misuse by mulieres simplices, simple women who rely on such herbs beyond the church's sanction. The passage stirs him with unease. He knows those women exist in the valley. He records their names each season, yet their lives unfold in ways his ledgers cannot measure. There is a knowledge beneath the surface of his ink, a whispering network of cures and secrets that eludes the abbey's reach. He recalls a recent visit to the village to assess the herds. Passing one of the outer huts, the home of the healer Agnes, he noticed a thick, sweet smell of hay and boiling herbs drifting through the open window. He had marked her dwelling as non-productive in the register. Now, that note feels naive. What if the true yield of her work cannot be counted or taxed? The abbey bell tolls, the next canonical hour. Lucian rises, and the warmth of his cell evaporates into the chill of the cloister. The walls around him, immense and impenetrable, remind him of his own confinement, a life built on stone and silence, so unlike the tangled, interdependent existence of the villagers below. As he walks beneath the arches, his thoughts grow reflective. His faith is anchored in scripture, in divine order, yet he senses that the herbal wisdom of the peasants, though born of earth, not heaven, sustains the same creation he worships. Perhaps salvation, in its simplest form, is also practical. Returning to his desk, he steadies the quill. The lines of ink resume, though his mind no longer rests entirely within the page. He writes, but he wonders. Between the truths that are written and those that are whispered lies a mystery he cannot name, one that rustles like wind through the valley far below. Brother Lucian walks toward the refectory, the soft scuff of his leather shoes against the cold stone floor, the only sound besides the low chant of the other monks. The smell of barley bread and watered wine drifts through the air, his daily fare plain and insufficient for the hours of labor ahead. Around him, his brothers eat in silence, their eyes lowered to the pages of sacred texts. It is a scene of intellectual devotion, cut off from the disorder of the world beyond the abbey walls. He chews the coarse bread slowly, feeling its rough texture on his tongue, but his mind lingers on the parallel story he had uncovered in the manuscript, the quiet wisdom of peasant women. He remembers the last harvest, when a serf's wife nearly died after a difficult childbirth, and help had come not from the abbey, but from a woman of the forest. That woman could only have been Agnes, the healer whose knowledge was never written in Latin, but lived on in whispered memory and practice. Something within him stirs, a curiosity that feels almost like guilt. After the meal, Lucian climbs the narrow spiral staircase to the abbey's highest tower, a space reserved for observing the heavens. The cold air hits his face as he emerges into the open, the scent of snow and stone sharp and purifying. From this vantage, Shadowvale unfolds below him, a tapestry of smoke and rooftops, of fields and faint movement. He scans the village with new eyes, searching for traces of that invisible world he had begun to imagine. His gaze catches a figure, Ilara, walking toward the well. Her wool cloak moves softly in the breeze, her posture steady and strong. For the first time, he sees a villager not as a number in a ledger, but as a living force within the valley's rhythm. Lucian notices the smoke rising from different chimneys, imagining the scents each carries: flax drying, barley cooking, perhaps the sweet, earthy perfume of steeping herbs. He wonders if the smoke from Ilara's cabin bears the aroma of valerian, the same plant he had read about that morning, one more thread linking her to Agnès and the secret knowledge of the women below. The abbey bell rings again, its solemn echo rolling down the hillside. Lucian descends the stairs, his hand brushing the cold, worn stone of the railing, a tactile reminder of duty. The rhythm of the cloister resumes around him, but a quiet revelation lingers. Life, he now knows, is not only what can be recorded and taxed, it is also what is healed and sustained in silence. Back in his cell, he resumes his botanical transcription, the weight of the quill familiar in his hand. His eyes rest on a passage describing a spring flower whose root eases the pain of women. The thought of the blacksmith's wife, Lyra, whose illness he had heard about in passing, returns to him, giving warmth and humanity to the ink before him. In that moment, the presence of the monk and his abbey stands for the formal structures of power, the patriarchy and the church, that strive to catalogue life but fail to perceive the strength moving quietly beyond their gaze. Lucian, without knowing it, is chronicling the dual nature of the medieval world, the rigid order of hierarchy and the creative, untamed pulse of survival, the faith in the written word and the faith in the earth's own remedies. The scent of beeswax fills the cell as he smooths the parchment, sealing his work with the fragrance of his world. Yet now, mingled with it in his thoughts, is the faint sweetness of valerian. He finishes the page, the dense Gothic letters glistening in the lamplight, a work complete. He feels at peace, not because he has solved the mystery, but because he has learned to see it. The gentle sound of the quill being wiped clean on a damp cloth is the last note of the day. The abbey walls hold perfect safety, yet his mind drifts to the valley below, to the peasants, to the women whose hands keep life alive through the knowledge of the earth. He imagines the curling smoke of Shadowvale rising toward the sky like a prayer, and when he bows his head that night, he prays not only for souls, but for the health of those hands, the ones that spin, that heal, and that feed the world. Back in the cabin at Shadowvale, the story's focus returns to Ilara, this time to a day of intense labor that demands a sharpening of every sense. The sound of Mathis's shuttle striking the loom rings through the room in a steady rhythm, a heartbeat of productivity filling the air. Ilara works beside him, surrounded by the mingled sense of wool, smoke, and human effort, a warm, honest perfume of shared endurance. Today, her task is to card the sheep's wool Mathis brought from the fair, a step that comes before spinning and requires both strength and care. She grips the wooden cards with their rows of iron teeth, feeling the greasy roughness of the fleece, the tug of fibers under her fingers. Before her eyes, the tangled clumps transform into soft, cloud-like tufts, a quiet spectacle of material rebirth. A small, curious medieval custom reveals itself in the process, the use of lanolin, the natural fat of wool. Beyond its water-resistant quality, it was prized as a balm for hands made dry and cracked by labor. Ilara rubs the excess into her palms, and the sensation is both oily and soothing, a simple, natural salve for the toll her work takes. Her gaze drifts toward Mathis at the loom. She watches the way his muscles tense as he pulls the threads taut, the way the wood creaks under the force of repetition. That motion, so constant and necessary, mirrors her own. It's the shared rhythm of survival. For a fleeting moment, her thoughts turn to Lyra and the secret of the meadow sweet she entrusted to her. The memory of helping a friend, of easing someone's pain, warms her from within. The steady rasp of the wool cards becomes a kind of silent mantra, connecting her to Agnes and the lineage of women who guard this hidden knowledge, wisdom worth far more than the wool she prepares. The smell of the fleece is strong and animal, its earthiness contrasting with the faint sweetness of the herbs she keeps hidden away. Ilara crosses to the hearth to add more wood. The fire's heat lashes at her face, and the flickering flames hypnotize her, a dance of light that reminds her of nature's power, tamed but never owned. Mathis pauses his work and glances toward her. He remarks on the fine quality of the wool she's carding, noting its smoothness, its purity. The touch of his finger on the soft fiber is his quiet praise, a rare gesture of respect. His language of affection is one of craft and diligence, not sentiment. Ilara smiles, her joy modest but genuine. Her soft laughter is swallowed by the hum of the loom as Mathis resumes his rhythm. She returns to her own craft, spindle in hand, and soon the buzz of spinning merges with the sharp beat of the shuttle, a symphony of labor, the music of life within their small home. Her fingers move swiftly, drawing the cleaned fibers into a fine, even thread. Watching them, one could mistake her for a master artisan, her movements graceful from years of repetition. The soft slide of the wool through her fingertips carries the quiet satisfaction of skill, patience made visible. The smell of the fleece, now faint and clean, is the scent of perfection in progress. The sun stands high and bright light streams through the open door, revealing dust swirling like golden motes in the air. Heat gathers in the cabin, pressing against her skin. Ilara knows it's time to fetch water from the well, a small, humble ritual that marks the rhythm of her days. The sound of her footsteps on the packed earth outside is steady and familiar, the sound of need that never truly rests. Ilara crosses the small yard in front of the cabin, and the warm afternoon air brushes against her face, carrying with it the scent of dry hay and sun-baked earth. The distant murmur of the stream blends with the steady hum of insects, forming a natural symphony that accompanies her steps. The path to the spring is lined with moss-covered stones and tiny wildflowers, the deep green of the landscape contrasting with the pale tone of her tired skin. It feels as though nature itself is watching her, every tree a quiet keeper of her secret intentions. When she reaches the spring, she kneels and feels the cool water run through her fingers, a sensation that awakens her body and restores her strength. The reflection of the sky ripples across the surface, and for a moment she sees herself there, stray strands of hair framing her face, calloused hands, determined eyes. She thinks of how the water is the unseen thread that ties together all life in the village, the fields, the animals, the weary bodies. The soft splash of water filling the bucket becomes a hypnotic rhythm, a song of constancy and survival. As she carries the full bucket back, the weight of it tugs at her arms, reminding her that even the simplest routines are acts of endurance. The smell of warm wood from the cabin mingles with the freshness of the water, and the contrast between heat and chill mirrors life in Shadowvale, harsh yet balanced. From inside, she hears Mathis humming under his breath, a rare sound that only escapes him when work goes well, and the quiet tune makes her smile. Inside again, Ilara pours part of the water into an earthen jug and washes her hands, watching the faint sheen of lanolin still glistening on her skin. The slick, protective feeling gives her a strange sense of comfort, as if the wool itself were leaving behind a trace of gratitude for her care. She runs her fingers through the carded wool, proud of its smooth, even texture, the reward of her patience. The soft smell of clean fleece and gentle fire is now the fragrance of her daily triumph. The steady rhythm of Mathis's loom fills the air, but beneath its noise lies harmony. Ilara realizes that the loom and her spindle speak in the same silent language, two voices weaving the same destiny. Mathis glances toward her, a brief acknowledgement passing between them. No words, no affection, just understanding born of shared survival. It is that bond, not love spoken aloud, but endurance lived side by side, that keeps their world steady. She breaks off a small piece of hard bread and dips it into the cool water, savoring the simple taste and the relief it brings. As she eats slowly, her eyes wander to the pile of finished thread in the corner. The sight soothes her. Each strand is a fragment of time made tangible, something that will soon be traded, worn, or sold. Time itself is the raw material of life. Afternoon light turns golden, spilling through the door and casting long, soft shadows across the earthen floor. The sun's rays catch on the fibers of wool, making them glimmer like threads of gold. Sweat slides down her temple, but she doesn't mind. The warmth means life, and fatigue is her quiet badge of honor. Outside, the wind stirs the dry leaves, and for a fleeting instant she feels at one with every sound, every scent, every texture around her. Her thoughts drift once more to Agnès, a comforting memory. Ilara imagines the healer in her cabin, preparing her infusions with the same devotion that she herself gives to spinning. There's something sacred in both tasks, the transformation of the raw into the healing, the simple into the essential. She almost thinks she can smell valerian in the air, faint but familiar, and she breathes deeply, grateful for the invisible bond they share. The loom falls silent, and the sudden quiet feels immense. Matthis stands, stretching his back, and comments on the progress of the cloth, the firmness of its weave, the evenness of its texture. Ilara steps closer to feel it, and the fabric's warmth beneath her fingertips feels new, alive, the product of both their hands. For a brief moment, pride replaces exhaustion. Life, she thinks, may be harsh, but it can still yield beauty. As the sun slips behind the hills, the cabin glows with amber light. Ilara's body feels heavy, but her heart is light. The day has been full of sounds, smells, textures, a quiet symphony of labor and humanity. She knows tomorrow will begin the same way, with the endless rhythm of spindle and loom. Yet there is comfort in repetition, in the simple act of creation. As long as her hands can move, life in Shadowvale will go on, woven thread by thread with patience, warmth and hope. Ilara's return from the spring is marked by the steady slosh of water swaying in the wooden bucket, a soft rhythm that contrasts with the mechanical thud of Mattis's loom. The clean scent of fresh water, faintly tinged with the minerals of the well, is a welcome relief in the dense air of the cabin. She sets the bucket near the hearth, feeling the coolness of the water refresh her hands. She sits again to resume spinning the carded wool, and her senses heighten. The soft touch of the transformed wool is entirely different from the coarse feel of flax. The sharp, steady hum of the spindle fills the air, and the sight of the fine thread winding neatly becomes her visual mantra, an act of creation demanding a meditative focus. As she works, a new, delicate sound filters in from outside, birds fluttering near the thatched roof, gathering straw for their nest. The scent of the hay becomes stronger with their movement, blending into the air with a quiet warmth. Ilara recalls a curious medieval belief about spinning, one that claimed spinning on an empty stomach would bring bad luck to both the thread and the home. For that reason, women always ate a small bowl of porridge before beginning their work. In truth, it was a practical way to ensure they had strength for the long, meticulous task. A superstition born of wisdom disguised as faith. The fire's warmth kisses her cheeks while cold air seeps through the cracks in the walls, a constant duality. The sight of the neat piles of flax and wool side by side gives her quiet satisfaction. She is not merely surviving, she is an artisan. The feel of the finished thread in her fingers is her silent diploma, proof of skill earned through labor. The ceaseless rhythm of Mattis's loom and her spindle creates the pulse of their home, a hymn to endurance. That shared cadence binds them more deeply than words ever could. The scent of sweat and flax, mingled with smoke, becomes the perfume of partnership, the essence of their simple union. Her thoughts drift to Lyra, and to the meadow sweet hidden beneath her bed. The secret she guards is the counterpoint to the openness of her labor. Possessing forbidden knowledge gives her an invisible kind of power, a quiet strength no one in the village would ever see. The memory of the plant's soft touch is a reminder of her newfound independence. By mid-afternoon, the sun tilts westward, and the light in the cabin dims, foreshadowing dusk. Ilara rises to stretch, her joints stiff, her body heavy. The dull ache reminds her of how fragile health can be, and how precious the wisdom of Agnès truly is. The loom falls silent. Mattis pauses to drink the water Ilara fetched. The sound of the wooden cup against his lips, the quiet swallow, these are the sounds of earned rest. He glances toward her, and in that look lies acknowledgement. He knows her spinning sustains his weaving. He returns to his work, and the shuttle begins to glide again, a picture of unwavering resolve. Ilara focuses once more on her spindle, and its hum resumes. The mingled scent of wood and wool fills the room, a fragrance of dedication and quiet strength. Her moment of contemplation is brief. She's intent on finishing the bundle of wool before she begins preparing supper. The repetitive motion becomes almost hypnotic, a rhythm in which her mind finds peace. The faint whisper of fibers slipping through her fingers is the sound of life being sustained. The sight of the completed wool is her private victory over scarcity. She is a master of touch and rhythm, her strength rooted in the serenity of her craft. As the day draws to a close, fatigue settles into her limbs, but contentment softens its edge. The sense of belonging and purpose wraps around her like a warm shawl, outshining the cold that creeps in with the night. Night had settled early, and the cabin revealed its mood through the dimming light. The oil lamp burned weak and yellow, a sign that the oil was nearly gone. The air had turned heavier, thicker with humidity, a sure sign of coming rain. Ilara and Mattis sat close to the hearth, wrapped in a calm, resigned silence after a long day of labor. Ilara was weaving a small rug from leftover threads of wool and flax, and the soft puncture of the needle through the fabric created a slower rhythm than the whir of her spindle or the beat of the loom. The smell of burning oil grew stronger, a scent that, to her, always carried memories of scarcity and long vigils, for every drop was precious. The sight of her work, transforming scraps into something useful, was her nightly meditation. She thought of Agnes's seed, the one meant to ward off the ailments of women, and her fingers instinctively brushed the clay jar hidden nearby. Its cool surface reminded her of her secret and her quiet autonomy. The thought of Lyra filled her chest with warmth. Helping her friend had been payment enough, a reward that deepened each time she recalled it. Outside, the wind began to whistle with a low, heavy tone, announcing the storm's approach. Mattis was mending one of his worn leather boots, and the sharp scent of damp hide mixed with the tallow he used to soften it. The odor clashed with the lingering smoke and wool, filling the cabin with earthy realism. He spoke little, lost in concentration, his rhythmic stitching adding another layer to the calm of the night. As Ilara worked, she silently recited Agnes's instructions for preparing the meadowsweet, its dosage, its discretion, reaffirming that the knowledge remained pure and protected. Her gaze drifted to the small pile of colored wool Mattis had brought from town. Its future beauty depended equally on her spinning and his weaving. The fire's glow spread warmly across the room, reinforcing the sense of safety that came with shared space. The coarse, thick wool beneath her fingers reminded her that life was built from steady labor, a truth she met daily. Even with the storm gathering, the cabin's simple comfort was her anchor. The lamplight flickered, dimming until shadows deepened across the walls. Shapes blurred into mystery, the spindle, the loom, Agnes's clay pot, all half lost in the glow, all more meaningful in the dark. Then came the first drops of rain, striking the thatched roof in firm, deliberate beats, adding a new rhythm to the night. Mattis, satisfied with his repair, set aside his tools and turned toward the fire. He remarked on Ilara's flax thread, noting he'd need more of it by morning to finish the next cloth. His voice was deep and steady, grounding her in the moment. Ilara nodded in silence, her hands still moving the needle through the fabric. Her mind wandered briefly to Brother Lucian, the abbey's scribe, and the cold austerity of his world of stone and parchment. The smell of leather and smoke around her felt far more real than incense and ink ever could. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the thatch in a muffled, soothing melody. Ilara focused on the weaving, the feel of uneven fibers merging into a new whole. She sipped her chamomile tea slowly, its mild flavor grounding her in the present, a familiar ritual at the close of each day. When she finally finished, she spread the rug before her, its rough simplicity a small but tangible triumph. She lay down, feeling the cool linen beneath her and the warmth of Mattis beside her. The rain's song lulled her toward sleep, and peace settled deep and slow, complete and unbroken. Rain falls steadily over the thatched roof, its muffled rhythm becoming the soundtrack of the night. The cabin in Shadowvale lies bathed in faint light, illuminated only by the intermittent glow of the embers in the hearth, which cast soft, trembling shadows on the walls. Ilara drifts in and out of sleep, her body warm, her mind still quietly replaying the day. She feels the dampness in the air seeping through the clay walls, a constant reminder of how fragile their shelter is against the elements. The smell of wet leather left by Matisse to dry near the fire mingles with the sweet, soothing scent of chamomile that lingers from her tea, a duality of aromas that perfectly defines life inside that space. In her half-dreaming thoughts, her worries return as fleeting images, the cool touch of Agnès's clay jar and its hidden seed, the echo of Lyra's cough she hopes the meadowsweet will finally silence. These quiet, inner fixations separate her wakeful mind from Matisse's deep, steady sleep, the heavy rest of a man who labors with his body. A thin beam of moonlight filters through a crack in the door, shifting faintly across the room. Ilara focuses on it, allowing its calm rhythm to settle her thoughts. She recalls an old medieval belief that rainwater collected under certain moons held healing powers used by healers in their potions, a poetic union of weather and folk magic that once gave meaning to storms. The rain's pattern rises and falls, a repetition that soothes her senses. She feels Matisse's warmth beside her, a reminder of physical safety. The touch of the linen sheet against her skin anchors her in comfort, a tactile assurance born of her own labor, the reward of hands that create. Her thoughts drift to the contrast between Brother Lucien's cold, orderly world of parchment and law and Agnès's warm, instinctive world of earth and medicine. Lucien's realm preserves life on paper, Agnès's preserves it in practice. Ilara realizes her fate now bridges both, though her spirit inclines toward the healer's quiet wisdom. The faint scent of carded wool in the corner speaks of tomorrow's work, while the lingering taste of chamomile marks her slow descent into rest. Her life may be predictable, its cycles unchanging, yet beneath that rhythm runs a secret current of purpose, a private thread of meaning she alone can feel. A distant rumble of thunder rolls across the valley, its low vibration making the packed earth floor tremble. The sound reminds her how fragile their home truly is, yet the warmth inside affirms her resilience. The night's slow tempo cradles her, drawing her toward serenity. Her mind returns to the secret seed Agnès entrusted to her, the one said to ward off the ailments of women. She imagines planting it beneath the shade, far from prying eyes. That future act feels like a vow, a small rebellion granting her power over her own body, something the world beyond her walls would never allow. Matisse's breathing grows softer, steadier, and Ilara finds her own breath falling into rhythm with his, a quiet testament to their shared existence. She closes her eyes, surrendering to her final calm thought. That rain purifies, and the night guards her secrets. The embers fade to a faint glow, and darkness envelops the cabin completely. The touch of Matisse's body beside her and the scent of linen on her skin are her last ties to waking life. She lets go, into silence, into safety, into peace. Serenity is complete. The rain had stopped, and morning arrived with crisp, clean air, the scent of damp earth and freshly washed forest lingering like a quiet blessing. The soft drip of water from the thatched roof was the only sound breaking the hush of dawn in Shadowvale. Ilara rose and lit the fire, feeling the sharp bite of cold in the air. The warmth that spread from the hearth reminded her of the endless cycle of labor needed to keep the home alive. Her hand brushed the clay jar beneath the bed, where the seed and the remaining valerian lay hidden, a silent reminder of her visit to Agnès and the knowledge she now carried, a secret that had strengthened her quietly from within. She prepared their meal, and the smell of barley porridge filled the cabin, the comforting scent of routine and survival. Matisse soon stirred and joined her, and the faint creak of the loom waiting to begin again hovered in the air like a promise. The sight of him eating bread in quiet focus reminded her of his contentment upon returning from the fair with bundles of coloured wool, their shared prize of hard work. Her gaze fell to the spindle resting nearby, poised and ready. Its familiar weight in her hands was a reminder of her craft and of the silent power it gave her to sustain their household. The spindle, smooth and worn from years of use, was an object of reverence, connecting her to generations of women who had spun both thread and fate. As she bent to gather more firewood, a fleeting thought of the hidden seed crossed her mind. She decided that before the day ended, she would plant it beneath the oak trees, far from prying eyes, an act of quiet defiance and bodily autonomy. That intention gave her a calm sense of anticipation, something to look forward to as the day unfolded. She thought again of Lyra, of the secret exchange of meadowsweet and the relief it had brought. The memory warmed her more deeply than the fire ever could. It was an invisible act of sisterhood, a testament to the unseen network of women who cared for one another when the world would not. One last thought crossed her mind, a curious piece of history. In the Middle Ages, bread was so essential that bakers who sold it, adulterated or underweight, were harshly punished. It was a reminder of how sacred honesty was in the trade of sustenance. The bread she and Matisse now ate, baked by the village, was more than food. It was trust made tangible, the symbol of shared survival. The loom began to sound again, its wooden rhythm filling the space. The faint, musky scent of carded wool mingled with the warmth of the fire. Ilara joined the day's work, her spindle humming softly, its rhythm now underscored by a quiet, resolute peace. The small cabin, her entire world, felt transformed into a fortress where labor and secrecy coexisted in harmony. The heat of the fire and the rough feel of linen grounded her in the tangible world. She thought of Brother Lucien's sharp, observing gaze and smiled to herself, knowing that her greatest treasure, the knowledge she carried, would never be written in any of his records. The sun climbed higher, flooding the room with light, yet Ilara's attention lingered on the shadowed patch of earth beyond the cabin, the place where she would plant her secret seed. It was a symbol of quiet rebellion, of health and self-possession. And as she worked, she felt her resolve root itself as deeply as the seed would soon do in the soil. The morning's work moved in steady rhythm, the loom and spindle weaving together in harmonious productivity. But Ilara's mind lingered on the coming afternoon. She remembered the sharp, earthy scent of Agnès's balm, that blend of soil and healing that had become a symbol of wisdom and resilience. The feel of linen between her fingers reminded her of her worth, but the secret knowledge she carried was her truest wealth. Matisse, absorbed in his loom, worked with quiet focus, and Ilara watched him with calm anticipation. Soon he would leave to help mend the village fence, a necessary task that would grant her a few hours alone. His brief words about needing more flax thread echoed their partnership, but she was already thinking ahead to the solitude waiting for her. Her shoulders ached from labor, a physical reminder of why her health mattered, and why the act she planned was essential. Preparing to close the circle of secrecy required care and silence, a personal ritual of autonomy and devotion. The sun stood high, and golden light filled the cabin, illuminating floating motes of dust that drifted in slow, graceful motion. The sight soothed her. She thought again of how, in medieval times, women often gathered to spin together, not just to share work, but to whisper confidences and preserve hidden knowledge, an unspoken sisterhood bound by thread. After their simple midday meal, Matisse donned his leather jerkin and gathered his tools. Their goodbye was brief, a quick touch of hands, before his footsteps faded down the path, leaving Ilara wrapped in the silence she had quietly longed for. The closing door felt like the opening of her freedom. Without hesitation, she took up a small, worn spade and retrieved the clay pot, its cool weight familiar in her palms. The mingled scent of damp earth and meadow sweet rose from it, the fragrance of her quiet mission. She stepped out behind the cabin to where the shadow of the oak trees fell thick and protective, a hidden corner where no curious villager ever strayed. The air felt different there, balanced between the safety of home and the untamed edge of the forest, the perfect place to entrust her secret. She dug a small hollow, the muted thud of the spade blending with the soft drip of water from the leaves. The sight of the rich, dark soil invited faith. Between her fingertips rested the rare seed from Agnès, delicate and smooth, small enough to vanish but powerful enough to change her life. Ilara planted it gently, like planting hope itself. The act was a wordless prayer, a declaration of her right to health, to her own body, to choice. She thought of Lyra's pain and of Agnès's calm instruction, and strength rose quietly within her. Covering the seed, she felt the cool, damp earth cling to her skin. Its scent was deep and raw, the fragrance of renewal and endurance. When she stood, the patch of ground looked untouched, but within it, her secret slept, safely hidden. Her steps back to the cabin were lighter. The burden of secrecy had passed into the soil. She washed her hands in cool water, the chill cleansing her fingers and her spirit alike. The familiar smell of home welcomed her as she resumed her spinning. The spindle's low hum filled the air, a song of purpose fulfilled. The silent loom beside her no longer felt like a symbol of confinement, but of partnership, of time reclaimed for something sacred. The fire's warmth and the linen's rough texture grounded her once again. Images of her life, Agnès's hut, Lyra's gratitude, the fair, Brother Lucian's distant gaze, the clay pot, and now the hidden seed, all wove together in her thoughts like threads in a single tapestry. Work and secrecy, survival and self-determination, all intertwined. A quiet sense of belonging to the great cycle of labor, creation, and healing settled over her. As she waited for Matisse's return, her heart rested in serenity. Her life was built on toil and repetition, yet within that rhythm she had found freedom, her own soft, enduring power. Evening descended over Shadow Vale, and the soft light of dusk bathed the small cabin in a warm, golden glow. Ilara sat by the hearth, the gentle crackle of the fire the only melody in the still air as she awaited Matisse's return. Her mind rested in deep serenity, the calm after the quiet act she had carried out that afternoon, and the mingled sense of linen and smoke wrapped her in an unshakable sense of safety. Her fingers brushed the clay pot that now lay empty of its seed yet full of promise, a silent echo of the hope she had sown in the soil hours before. The cabin, touched by the faint amber light, appeared as a small sanctuary standing firm against the vast darkness of the feudal world beyond. She turned her thoughts to the repetitive work that had woven the fabric of her life. Lifting the spindle, she felt the familiar weight of the polished wood and the texture of the last few strands of thread. The soft whir as it turned was like a final mantra of her autonomy and endurance. The spindle was no longer merely a tool. It had become a symbol of her quiet, creative strength. The sweet scent of valerian burning on the embers rose in slow curls of smoke, a last reminder of her bond with Agnès, the healer. The mild taste of chamomile tea warmed her tongue, spreading a wave of tranquility through her body. The wisdom of the earth and of women had nourished and protected her. As she touched the linen she had spun, she thought of the stories her grandmother once told of women who fought dragons and legends. Ilara had fought no beasts, but she had faced sickness, hunger, and the weight of a society that sought to bind her, finding her courage instead in discretion and understanding. Her struggle was the truest kind of epic, and her victory was survival itself. The cabin felt whole now, the loom, the spindle, the fire, all in their rightful places. That quiet order was her triumph. The steady beat of her heart and the warmth of the hearth carried the same message. Peace was not the absence of labor, but the presence of purpose. The distant sound of Mattis's footsteps grew nearer, familiar but never threatening. She knew that while he might be seen as the master of the house, it was she who held the secret that safeguarded them both, a silent power that would never be written or spoken. Her hand resting over her chest was her final affirmation of that inner strength. The smell of fresh wood and sweat that followed Mattis through the door was the scent of their shared life, their interdependence. He entered weary yet content, and the sight of him bathed in the fire's glow was a quiet reminder of unity. The warmth drew him to her, and when he sat beside her, the gentle touch of his shoulder against hers closed the circle of the day's labor. Ilara leaned closer, breathing in his scent. The touch of her hand in his was a small, wordless gesture of affection. The outside world, with its lords, taxes, and hierarchies, seemed to dissolve beyond their mud walls. Peace settled within the cabin, a peace earned through toil and guarded by wisdom. The faint light of the oil lamp flickered, promising rest. The soft sigh Mattis let out as he relaxed was his calm farewell to the day. He knew nothing of her secrets, yet he lived under their quiet protection. As Ilara lay down, the feel of cool linen beneath her was a balm. The last sound she heard was the slow, dying whisper of the embers, and within that silence, all was well. Darkness deepened over Shadowvale, and the cabin sank into a soft half-light where the fading warmth of the hearth stood as the last defense against the night's chill. Ilara surrendered to sleep. The sound of Mattis's breathing was steady and protective, a rustic melody that lulled her weary mind. The sweet scent of chamomile lingered in the air, the fragrance of her gentle farewell to the day. Her sleep was deep and peaceful, and within it her mind began to weave poetic farewells. She saw the spindle spinning in the void, turning not only flax but time itself into something lasting and meaningful, a vision that echoed the earliest images of her labor. She felt the seed buried in the soil, a quiet echo of reflection between past and present. Hidden in the shadow, the seed symbolized her hope for control over the future, a power women of old could only dream of. The memory of damp earth carried a message of peace. True freedom lies in knowledge, in the ability to nurture and protect oneself and others. The faint whisper of wind through the chimney was the last sound connecting her to the outer world. In her mind's eye, she saw the face of Agnes, the healer, whose image stood as a beacon of autonomy and wisdom. Ilara knew that the path she had chosen, the path of secret knowledge, was the path of strength. She was a spinner, yes, but also a guardian of wisdom older than any manuscript in the abbey. The gentle brush of Mattis's hand against hers in his sleep reminded her of the bond fate had forged between them. Yet she knew her heart and her thoughts belonged only to her. The contrast between her public life of toil and her private life of wisdom was the quiet truth that had become her greatest light, a natural closing to her journey of self-discovery. Ilara's final thoughts drifted to the village, Shadowvale, nestled in the dark. She was an unseen but essential thread in its fabric. Her labor, her spinning, her ability to heal in secret, these were her true powers. She fell asleep knowing her duty was fulfilled and her secret safely buried in the earth. The story's quiet climax was a deep, unshakable serenity. The spindle, the salt, and the seed lingered in her dreams, poetic symbols of a life fully lived. The warmth of home cradled her, and the night's gentle sounds became her lullaby. Until tomorrow, traveller, come wander once more through these forgotten ages. You know where to find me, right here between history and dream. Like this story, subscribe to the channel, and rest well tonight.